Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving north on Route 14 through southern Illinois, somewhere between McLeansboro and Wayne City. It was early September, and the sun had just dipped below the tree line. That kind of time where the sky's still lit up, but everything else is already shadowed. I'd left my aunt's place late and figured I'd just make it home before midnight if I didn't stop too long. That stretch of 14 is pretty empty, just cornfields, silos, and the occasional cluster of trees or rundown barn. I had music playing low and my windows cracked. It was still warm enough that the breeze felt good, and there were crickets starting up in the ditches. A little past 7:30, I noticed some lights off to the left, maybe half a mile into a field. At first I figured it was farm equipment. Those big harvesters have lights all over, but these weren't moving, and they were high up. 5 lights, maybe 6, in a kind of shallow arc, all glowing that pale yellow white, not quite as harsh as headlights. They just hovered there, totally still. No blinking, no sound, and too spread out to be anything attached to a single vehicle. I slowed down a bit, trying to get a better angle, but the hedgerows and corn were too high. I thought about pulling over, but there wasn't a shoulder, just gravel and drainage. Then, as I rounded a slight bend, the trees blocked the field entirely. When I came out the other side, maybe 30 seconds later, the lights were gone. It bugged me. I kept looking in the mirrors, expecting to see them again. At one point, I even thought I saw them reappear way back behind me, but it was faint, and I couldn't tell if it was just a reflection on the glass. I told myself it was probably a drone display or something, some ag-tech thing I didn't understand. But the road stayed empty, and the longer I drove, the more that moment stuck with me. It didn't feel like something explainable. That's the best I can say. About 2 hours later, I pulled into a little gas station near Yucca. I'd been needing to pee for the last 40 miles and figured I'd grab something to drink too. It was one of those older stations, just 2 pumps out front and a small shop with flickering fluorescent lights. No other cars were there when I pulled in, but there was a black SUV parked off to the side, the engine off, windows up. Looked newer, out of place for the area. I went inside, used the bathroom, bought a bottle of water and a snack. When I came back out, the SUV was still there. I didn't think much of it until I got in my car, started the engine, and rolled down the window a bit to cool things off. That's when a man walked up. I didn't hear him approach. He just leaned forward out of the dark and rested his hand lightly on the window frame, which startled the hell out of me. He was wearing a black suit, not a cheap one. This looked fitted. Black tie, white shirt, sunglasses, even though it was full dark by then. He wasn't smiling. Not angry, just expressionless. "You didn't see anything unusual on Route 14, did you?" he asked. His voice was soft but clipped, no accent I could place, almost robotic in tone. He didn't look in the window so much as through it, like he was studying something behind me. I just stared at him for a second. Then I said, "No." He didn't respond right away, just kept his hand there, watching me. Then he nodded once, let go of the car, and walked back toward the SUV. He didn't get in, though. He just stood next to the driver's side door, facing away from me. I backed out a little faster than usual and pulled out onto the road. My hands were sweating. I don't know why, exactly. He hadn't threatened me, hadn't said anything that weird on paper. But something about him felt wrong. Off in a way I couldn't name. A mile down the road, I checked my mirror. The SUV was behind me, maybe 2 car lengths back. No headlights, just a black shape moving in the dark. It stayed behind me for about 15 miles, never gaining, never falling back. I tried switching lanes, slowing down, speeding up a bit. It mirrored everything. It wasn't tailgating, but it was there, like it was tethered to me. Finally, I turned off onto a smaller county road, one that curved back toward the highway through a bunch of farmland. No real reason, just a hunch. I watched in the mirror. Sure enough, the SUV followed. I took another random turn, this one onto a gravel lane. No streetlight, barely wide enough for 2 cars. There were no houses visible, just open dark fields. When I looked back again, the SUV was gone. I pulled over and killed my lights, engine still running, waited, listened, nothing. I stayed there for maybe 3 minutes. No other cars came. No sound but insects and the wind in the stalks. When I finally pulled back onto the road and started heading home again, I didn't see the SUV for the rest of the drive. But the weird part is what happened the next morning. When I went out to my car, there were fingerprints on the driver's side window. Smudges where the man had leaned in, sure, but also higher up on the frame above the window, almost like someone had been gripping it from the top. And there was a mark, thin and straight, running from the edge of the roof down to the door handle. It wasn't a scratch. It looked like some kind of residue, slightly oily, faintly iridescent in the sun. I tried wiping it off with a towel, but it left a stain, like it had sunk into the paint. I had the car washed later that day. The streak stayed. I never saw the SUV again. But a few nights after that, I was walking the dog just before bed and noticed a black sedan parked across the street from my house. No one inside. No lights on. It wasn't one of the neighbors' cars. When I looked again, 5 minutes later, it was gone. Could be unrelated? I don't know, but I've started avoiding Route 14. Not because of the lights, exactly. It's the question. The way he asked it. Like he already knew the answer. We were behind Tyler's house, right at the edge of the cornfield where the woods thin out. It was maybe 9:45 at night. Warm for late October in Iowa, and still enough leaves on the trees to rustle when the wind picked up. You could hear the grain dryers going in the distance. It smelled like burnt chaff and fertilizer, that dusty farm smell that never really goes away. There were 4 of us, me, Tyler, Jordan, and Miles. We weren't drinking or anything. Just hanging out before Halloween weekend, walking the paths we'd made years ago through the rows. Tyler had this cheap drone with a camera, and he wanted to get shots of the field at night for a dumb horror short he was trying to film. We were about 100 yards in when we saw the first one, just a dim little light like a flashlight in the sky. Miles pointed it out. It blinked twice, paused, then blinked again. It wasn't a plane, no sound, and it didn't move like a drone either. It sort of hung there, then slid to the side real slow. Then it stopped again. Tyler took his phone out and started filming. That's when we noticed the other lights, 2 more, farther off and lower. They pulsed together, then separately, like some kind of pattern. Jordan joked that it looked like Morse code for "go away," but none of us laughed. I remember getting this weird feeling in my gut. Not scared exactly. More like we were somewhere we weren't supposed to be. Like the lights were watching us, not the other way around. We kept watching. Tyler started flying his drone up to get a better view. It buzzed over the stalks and tilted toward the lights. He tapped record and we all crouched, trying to stay out of the shot. The drone got maybe 30 feet up when the lights shifted. They didn't fade or blink. They just moved, fast, in perfect sync. Not up or down, but sideways. The whole sky above the field kind of shimmered, like heat rising off asphalt, and the lights zipped into that shimmer and vanished. The drone feed cut out right after, just went black. Tyler pulled it down manually. It landed fine, no damage, but the battery read full and the camera wasn't working. We hiked back to the house fast. No one said much. I think we were all hoping someone would say it was a prank or an illusion or something, but nobody did. Tyler plugged the drone into his laptop, and the footage showed up just static where the lights were. The rest of it was fine, but the part where he pointed it at the sky, white fuzz. He checked his phone video next. That's where it got weirder. He'd recorded over a minute of the lights before the drone even launched. But when he opened the gallery, the file was gone. Not deleted. Gone. No thumbnail, no corrupted version, nothing in the cloud backup either. He swore he didn't delete it. Jordan checked his phone too. He'd been filming from the side, not as close. Same thing. The video app froze when he tried to open it, then rebooted, and the clip was missing. I hadn't recorded anything, but I pulled out my phone just to check. There was a new notification I didn't recognize, some permissions thing that said remote access completed. It was timestamped at 9:58. I hadn't downloaded any that day. We left not long after. It was quiet on the street. I drove home with the radio low and kept looking in the rearview mirror, even though I knew how stupid that was. Nothing happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling we'd been marked somehow. Watched. The next morning at school, everything felt off. Tyler looked like he hadn't slept. He kept checking his phone like he expected it to disappear out of his hand. Miles said he'd heard clicking sounds through his phone speaker overnight. Jordan said his Wi-Fi disconnected at 3 a.m. and wouldn't reconnect until morning, even though everyone else in his house had no issues. Then, after fourth period, I saw him. A man in a black suit standing by the edge of the senior lot, near the chain link fence. He wasn't talking to anyone, just standing there, pacing slowly back and forth. Black tie, white shirt, clean shave, black sunglasses. At first I thought maybe he was someone's dad, or a substitute waiting to be let in. But he wasn't looking at the building, he was looking at the cars. One of the teachers came outside and sort of paused when she saw him. She started toward him and he walked off without saying anything. He didn't go to a car, just turned and disappeared around the corner of the gym. I told Tyler about it in the lunch line. He got real quiet. Then he said his mom found boot prints in their backyard that morning, near the fence. Just one set, size 12 or 13, straight line. No animal prints, no mud dragged away, like someone walked in, stood there, then walked back out. We all agreed not to talk about it anymore, at least not at school. The videos were gone, the drone feed was garbage, and we didn't have anything to show for it. But each of us noticed little things in the days after. Jordan's email account locked him out, said it had been accessed from Virginia. Miles's car alarm went off 3 nights in a row at exactly 2:17 a.m., no matter where he parked. Tyler stopped bringing his laptop to school altogether, said it wouldn't hold a charge anymore, even plugged in. One afternoon, I came home to find my bedroom window open. It had been locked that morning. Nothing was missing, nothing moved, but my phone was sitting on the windowsill instead of the charger where I'd left it. I tried not to think about the man in the parking lot, but about a week later I saw him again. I was walking to my car after practice around 5:30, sun already down. I cut across the grass near the side lot, and he was there, standing under the bleachers, half in shadow, perfectly still. No phone, no expression, just standing with his hands clasped in front of him like he was waiting for something. I didn't stop. I didn't even pretend to look. I got in my car and left. We never saw the lights again. But 2 months later, Tyler moved to Missouri. His mom said it was for her job, but I don't think that's the full story. He never really said goodbye, just vanished from the group chat one day. The drone's still at Miles's house, in a shoebox under his bed. We haven't tried to use it since. I launched the drone from my backyard just after sunset. It was August, and even though the sun had dipped behind the hills, the air still felt sticky. I live on the edge of a small valley in western Oregon, with nothing but forest and a few weathered radio towers on the ridge above. A friend had tipped me off about a spot up there, Hilltop 6, he called it, where you could get a clear 360-degree view without any power lines or cell towers in the way. Perfect for long-range videography. I'd packed the drone into its carry case around 7:15 p.m., drove up the narrow gravel road to the old logging trail, and set up on a flat patch of dirt about 200 yards below the towers. No one else around, no street lights, just the whir of cicadas and the faint hum of distant traffic on the highway. I ran through my pre-flight checklist. Props locked, battery full, GPS locked. I popped the drone into the air and let it hover at about 150 feet, camera aimed toward the ridge. The live feed on my tablet was crisp, golden light fading to blue, the outlines of Douglas firs crisp against the sky. After a few minutes of steady pan shots, I decided to send the drone higher, up to 300 feet, then lean the camera down toward the road above me. I tapped the joystick and watched the feed stutter for a second, just a split-second lag. Then it locked up completely. The screen froze on a gray, pixelated mess, like digital snow. I hit the emergency hover button. The drone beeped, but the feed remained static. I sprinted up the trail, tablet in hand, eyes glued to the signal strength meter, which was blinking red. I reached the base of the ridge and paused, pointing the tablet at the drone's last known location. No bird's eye view now, just the gray static until finally the live image returned. The first thing I saw was the ground dropping away, and then at the edge of the frame, something slick and dark streaking directly beneath the drone. I rewound the feed. On slow motion, the glitch revealed a long, slender shape, smooth as oil, slicing past the lens at maybe 100 miles an hour. No wings, no rotors, just a dark blur like a shark cruising through the air. The video feed had lost maybe 4 frames, but in the ones it caught, I could see the shape cast no shadow, generate no downdraft, nothing but pure, impossible motion. I set the drone to return home and watched it skitter back along the GPS route. My heart was racing. I'd logged hundreds of flights, never seen anything like that. Wind was light, nothing that would explain a random gust. No birds that big out here. I scrambled down the hill as the drone touched down and locked its motors. I forgot to disengage the geofence before packing up. My phone buzzed just as I clipped the controller into my belt. It was a voicemail. Number blocked, no caller ID, no country code, just untraceable on the screen. I figured it was some telemarketer glitch or a wrong number. In the car, I hit play. Quiet breathing. Then a male voice, smooth and low. "We need you to stop flying near Hilltop 6. You've seen enough." A click, then static. Then the line went dead. I sat there in the busted streetlight at the bottom of the ridge, that phone in my hand, trying to figure out what had just happened. I scrolled through my recent calls. Nothing. No message on my service provider. No mention in my call log. The voicemail interface showed it as new, but pressing any buttons just returned an error. Message unavailable. I drove home in silence. The road was empty. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting headlights, but there was nothing. At home, I plugged the drone controller into my laptop to download the footage. Everything from the first flight was there. The panning ridge, the sunset glow. Then the glitch frames. The dark streak only appeared for a few frames, smeared across the video like ink. I exported that clip to a separate folder, set it aside, and shut down the software. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept replaying the voicemail in my head, that flat command about Hilltop 6 phrased like I'd already agreed to obey. At 2 a.m., I got up to grab water and noticed my phone screen glowing on the nightstand. No new notifications. But when I picked it up, the voicemail icon blinked again. I tapped it, but it just spun like it was loading, then stopped. I spent the next morning researching airspace restrictions around Hilltop 6. The FAA charts showed only Class G airspace, totally uncontrolled. No military zones, no restricted altitudes. I found forum posts from other drone pilots. Nothing about weird objects, nothing about men in black or clandestine warnings. That night, I went back out, determined to get a clean shot of the ridge. I parked at my usual spot at 7 p.m., set up the drone, and climbed the trail again. I adjusted the camera to face west, toward the sunset, then leveled it out straight. I ran the drone up to 200 feet, then 250, and the feed was stable. No glitches, no lag. I hovered for a minute, watching the hillside lighten in the last rays. Then, at exactly 7:23, the feed flickered to gray static again. I throttled up as a reflex and saw the same dark blur flash beneath the drone, only faster this time. Just 2 frames of shape before the feed cut out entirely. My controller buzzed with a signal loss alert. I hit RTH and waited, scanning the sky with my own eyes. No blinking lights, no contrails. Just an empty slope of pine trees, tinted orange by the sunset. When the drone landed, I peeled off my goggles and stared at the ridge, half expecting someone to step out of the trees. Nothing. No vague movements, no footprints in the dirt around my launch pad. I packed up in record time, heart hammering. On the drive down, my phone rang. Number private. I didn't answer. It went to voicemail automatically, another one. After I got home, I played it. "We told you to stop. This is your final warning." The same voice. Calm. Quiet. Distant. My hands shook as I deleted the files on my phone. I unplugged the drone controller. I erased the video from the laptop. I even tore up the printed FAA map I'd used. That morning, I checked Craigslist, managed to sell the drone and controller for half price, listed it as faulty. I drove to the post office and shipped it off to a random P.O. box in Nevada. I told the buyer it had video issues, told them to deal with it. I still think about Hilltop 6 sometimes, about that silent shape zipping through my live feed, about the men in black who didn't show up in any call logs. But I don't go back there, and I don't fly drones anymore. And every now and then, late at night, I swear I can hear a soft hum in the breeze, like a rotor far overhead, except there's nothing but stars. I pulled off the dirt road onto the gravel lot beside Mirror Lake just after 10 that Friday night. The moon was almost full, bright enough to light the pines, but dim against the low fog rolling in off the water. I'd driven 2 hours from Salt Creek to catch what the forecast called anomalous light displays. Basically, some atmospheric glow people had been reporting. I'm an amateur videographer, so I'd brought my DSLR on a tripod and my smartphone for backup. I set up about 20 feet from the shore, aimed the camera at the water. The lake was glassy, like someone had poured mercury over the rocks. I hit record and sat on a cooler with my coffee thermos, waiting. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind through the cedars and the occasional splash, probably ducks settling for the night. Around 10:17, I saw the first ripple, a faint shimmer on the far side of the lake, just above the tree line. At first, it was a thin line of pale blue light, almost electric. Then it curved upward, arcing in a short semicircle before dipping behind the trees again. I leaned forward and switched to video mode on my phone, panned left to right. The DSLR feed was smooth, 30 FPS, nice and steady, but I wanted a quick clip too. For the next 5 minutes, lights emerged over various spots along the ridge. Pale white, sometimes with a hint of green or amber, always silent. They moved in irregular patterns, loops, zigzags, little spirals, like kids playing with a laser pointer behind a projector screen. At one point, 2 lights did a mirrored dance, crossing paths and then reversing course. I felt a jolt of excitement, the kind you get when you know you're getting something good. I let the phone rest on the tripod and focused on the DSLR, tracking one bright orb as it glided above the pines. There was no strobe, no blinking sequence, just fluid motion like someone drawing with light. After about 10 minutes, the lights faded out. The lake turned back to black glass. I stopped recording on both cameras, reviewed the phone clip quickly. Nothing else showed, just the shapes of trees and the wavering orbs. Satisfied, I packed the phone away, but left the DSLR rolling a bit longer to catch reflections on the water. When I finally shut it off, must have been 10:35, I walked over to the cooler and grabbed my phone. That's when the hair on my arm stood up. In the small preview window, there was a flicker of movement behind me, a dark shape stepping 2 feet to my right, casting a slight shadow on the cooler. I thought it was a trick, maybe a branch swaying, but when I tapped to play full screen, I froze. There was a figure in a dark suit standing just outside the camera's soft focus fringe facing the lake. I'd heard no footsteps, no rustling, and I definitely hadn't felt anyone behind me. I scrubbed through the clip frame by frame. The man appeared for exactly 17 frames, just under a second, then vanished. His posture was stiff, like he'd walked up, turned toward me, then stepped back out of view. I blew up the image, but the face was too blurry, just a dark oval under the brim of what looked like a fedora. No light glinted off glasses or metal, no features. My stomach dropped. I checked over my shoulder in the moonlight. Nothing but pines, nothing but fog. My cooler rocked slightly in the breeze. I leaned in, sniffed the air, heard nothing but wind and water. I told myself it was probably someone on a late-night walk, maybe a park ranger checking on boaters. But the suit, the way he appeared in the video, I didn't buy it. I drove home in near silence, roads empty, headlights reflecting off mist. When I got to my apartment in town, I sat at my desk and loaded the DSLR footage onto my computer. The lights were there, clear and steady, but there was no figure in that video, only my camera swinging to catch the last shimmer, then bobbing on the tripod as I packed up. No secondary angle to confirm the phone clip. Just one lens caught him. I considered hiking back out, confronting whoever that was, but every time I'd thought about crossing that dark lot, I imagined the man stepping out of the pines again, watching me. So I didn't go back. Tuesday rolled around. I was at the office, working on my day job as a systems analyst at a small IT firm. Around 3 p.m., the receptionist said someone was here to see me. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I walked to the lobby. There he was. Same black suit, same dark fedora, hands exactly at his sides. No badge, no name tag, no phone or briefcase. Just standing there looking at the back of my head through the glass door. He looked up when I stepped into the lobby. His eyes were hidden in shadow, but I got a sense of calm, unsettling calm, like a predator sizing up prey. He said, "Mr. Ellis?" I nodded. "Yes?" He put one finger to his lips. "Shh," then reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a leather-bound folder. He flipped it open on the countertop. Inside was a single piece of paper typed, open quote, observations. Subject: light phenomena at Mirror Lake. Recording device: personal phone and DSLR. Post-processing not authorized. Interested party in reflections. Reporting required. Close quote. He closed the folder and said, "I'm an interested party in reflections. I'd like to know what you've seen." I cleared my throat. "Who are you?" He didn't answer, just extended the folder toward me like a plate. No expression. I glanced around. Receptionist was at her desk, pretending to file papers. Someone else in the waiting area stared at her phone, not looking over. No one was paying attention. I backed off and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He tapped the folder. "The footage. Transfer the files to me. We'll discuss terms." I shook my head. "I can't." He straightened up, stared at me for what felt like a minute, then closed the folder and slipped it back inside his jacket. He said, "Very well, but know this. Reflections can be dangerous." His voice was soft, but I felt it like a slap. He walked out without another word. The receptionist looked up at me, brows furrowed, as the door closed behind him. I went back to my desk numb. My phone in my pocket vibrated, a text from an unknown number. "Don't share those videos." I haven't shared them. The footage sits on a hidden drive. I haven't returned to Mirror Lake. But sometimes late at night, when the power flickers, I swear I see shapes moving in the glass. Faint glimmers behind my window, like pale lights repeating the patterns I filmed. And once, on the security cam outside my apartment, I thought I saw someone in a dark suit standing under the street lamp, backlit by fog before the frame went static. I came around a bend on the Weatherford Trail just as the mist was lifting off the pines, and there it was. Black sedan, engine ticking hot, tires sunk an inch into the dirt. I'd started hiking before sunrise, hoping to reach Shelter Rock by noon, but this was neither rental nor local rig. No plates, no decals, just a sleek, unmarked car parked sideways across the single track, doors closed tight, windows dark. I stopped maybe 20 feet out, swallowed a mouthful of water, and tried to make sense of it. No footprints beyond mine, no keys on the hood, nothing obvious pointing to its owner. The engine was still warm enough that heat wisped off the metal like breath. I wasn't sure whether to check inside or hike on, but I needed to pee, and the focus of my mind shifted violently. What if someone was still in there? Hurt or trapped? I edged forward, boots sinking in the soft earth, and peered in through the passenger window. No one in the front seat. No purse, no backpack, no phone. The glove box was closed, the center console latched. I knocked on the glass once, softly, then harder. Still no answer. I tried the door handle. It clicked, but didn't open like it was locked. I crouched and shined my flashlight into the back seat. There was a single duffel bag, military green, nylon, zipped shut. I flicked on the flashlight beam, saw nothing else. No sign of blood or struggle. Just that bag, resting like it had been set down moments before. My heart thumped. Part of me wanted to leave, to pretend I hadn't seen it, but I felt responsible. I set my pack down, fumbled for my phone to call the ranger station at Cold Spring Camp, but there was no reception. I tried again. Nothing. So I snapped photos of the license plate area, just blank metal, and went around to the driver's side. Same story. Locked, empty, engine warm. Light filtered stronger now, sun breaching the ridge. I unzipped the duffel bag. Inside were 3 rolled black shirts, a pair of dark socks, and a thin envelope stamped "Not for public release." The envelope was sealed. I turned it over, looked at the flap. No name, no date. I shoved it back in, zipped the bag, and closed it. Then I left the bag on the roof and jogged back to my pack. I debated, should I carry the bag down for help? But it was heavy and awkward. I didn't know what was in that envelope, and I didn't want to be responsible if it contained something dangerous. I tucked my phone into airplane mode, just in case, and decided I'd hike to the next junction, about 3 miles down, where there was a spot that sometimes got a signal. If I got through, I'd call it in. On the way down, I felt eyes on me. Not a person visible, just that prickly sense you get when you're being watched. I stopped twice, spun in a circle, only trees, only rocks, only the shifting shadows. At the junction, I stopped at the big granite outcrop where hikers carve names. I waited a minute, then tried my phone. 1 bar. I dialed park headquarters, rang twice, then clicked to voicemail. This is Ranger Salazar. If this is urgent, press 1. I pressed 1. Ring, ring, then a click and static. I told him who I was, where I'd found the car, that the engine was warm, there was an envelope marked not for public release. I said, please send someone. Thank you, click. I hit end before the beep. I sat on a boulder, ate a granola bar, and watched fog swirl through the pines. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number that just said, turn back. I stared at it, thumb hovering over call back, but there was no voicemail, no ID. I deleted it. I waited another 20 minutes, but no park vehicle came through. I pocketed the phone and started back up the trail toward the car. My stomach was in knots. I felt like I'd walked into the middle of something not meant for me. When I reached the clearing, the car was gone. No tire tracks, no skid marks, just the disturbed ground where it had sat in that duffel bag on the dirt. I picked up the bag, light now, nothing rattling inside, and headed down before I changed my mind. By late afternoon, I'd made it to Cold Spring Camp. The ranger station was a weathered A-frame cabin with 2 windows and a sliding door. I knocked and let myself in. The ranger on duty, a woman named Perkins, sat behind a battered desk, sorting maps. I introduced myself, gave my name and permit number, explained the car, the envelope, the messages. Ranger Perkins frowned and reached for a logbook. She flipped pages slowly, squinted, then said, "No one called about interference today." Her voice was neutral, like she did this all the time. I pointed at the envelope description. She tapped a finger on the desk. "We've had reports of trail cams glitching near the ridge, weird electrical interference, but nothing about cars." I asked if interference meant anything. She hesitated and said, "It's radio jamming. GPS, cell, drone controls. Happens sometimes near the towers." I told her the car was gone. She said she'd send someone in the morning to look. I gave her the duffel bag and she put it in a locker behind the desk. I stayed the night in a camper cabin they rented out, just a cot and a propane heater. At dusk, I walked to the picnic tables to watch the ridge. The towers loomed, blinking red lights. I sat and drank instant coffee, but my mind kept drifting back to that car, those shirts, and the envelope label. What wasn't for public release? Around 9 p.m., the door rattled. I wasn't expecting anyone. I cracked it open and saw 2 men in black suits standing just outside the porch light. No badges, no hats, nothing to connect them to park services. They looked ordinary except for their clothes, new, perfectly pressed against the chill. I stepped back as they approached. The taller one said, "Evening." His voice was polite but distant. The shorter one said, "We'd like to ask about anyone reporting interference." I pointed toward the station cabin. "Ranger Perkins just took a duffel bag. She said something about GPS jamming." They nodded, as if they'd heard that already. Then the tall one asked, "Did you notice anything else unusual? Lights? Sounds? Anything off the trail?" I thought about the warm engine, the envelope, the phantom message on my phone. I told them the car was gone when I returned, but its engine was still warm when I found it. The shorter one lifted a hand, palm out, and said, "Thank you. That will be all." No smile, no follow-up. I waited to see if they'd say more, but they just stood, back straight, hands by their sides. Then they turned and walked down the path toward the station, straight into the dark without flashlights. I watched until they disappeared. The night was still, only crickets and pine needles drifting in the breeze. I locked the cabin door and pulled the covers over my shoulder. In the morning, the duffel bag was gone from the locker. Ranger Perkins claimed never to have seen it. The logbook still showed no report of interference. The trail crew found no sign of the car. The GPS logs on my phone didn't record the coordinates. I checked them myself. I hiked out that day, skipping Shelter Rock entirely. I left the trail early, took the main road back to town. I went home, put a new lock on my backpack, and tossed the photo of the envelope into the trash. Sometimes I drive past that logging road and glance up at the tower ridge. No traffic, no parked cars, no men in black, just quiet forest and the distant hum of the town below. But once in a while my phone buzzes with a message from an unknown number, and I don't open it. I rolled off State Route 89 onto the gravel lot of Pine Creek Station at 11:03 p.m. The sign's neon open buzzed and flickered through a haze of fog settling in off the nearby river. It was late October, and the temperature had dropped enough that I could see my breath when I stepped out of the car. I needed gas, my tank was on E, and I was tired of worrying whether I'd make it to the next stop 20 miles down the road. I cut the engine and opened the door. The only lights were the flickering neon and a single overhead lamp above the pump. I clicked the lock on my little hatchback, grabbed the nozzle, and started pumping. That's when I noticed the first sedan, parked maybe 20 feet away on the far side of the building. Black, tinted windows, immaculate paint, headlights off. Inside, in the driver's seat, was a man in a suit. Black jacket, crisp white shirt, narrow tie. His posture was rigid. He sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. I called out, "Hey!" softly, but he didn't move. I expected him to get out or at least glance at me. He didn't. I shook it off and looked toward the other side of the lot. The same model black sedan parked at the exact same distance on the opposite pump, engine running low and hollow, idling quietly. Another man sat in the driver's seat, same suit, same posture, arms resting straight on the wheel, face a shadow behind his dark sunglasses. I stared long enough to note that their headlights were off, but their taillights glowed faintly red, as if freshly turned off just a moment ago. The gas clicked off at $20. I snapped the nozzle back into place and locked up. I fished for my wallet and my purse, passed the clerk at 20, and got a receipt. I glanced back at the two cars. Both drivers hadn't even registered that I'd moved. The stillness felt deliberate. I headed for the door of the station, shivering in the cold air. Inside, the clerk, a young guy named Derek who always stayed late, was stocking chips. No bell on the door. He didn't look up until I was almost at the counter. I asked if anyone else had come in, and he said no. I told him about the cars outside. He shrugged and said folks sometimes park there overnight, though he hadn't seen those before. Maybe hunters, he said. I nodded, paid for a soda, and told him thanks. Back outside, I took a long swig of cola and scanned the lot. The sedans were exactly where I'd left them. I thought about snapping a photo, but my phone battery was nearly dead, and I didn't want to fumble with it. Instead, I climbed back into my car, locked the doors, and let the interior light click off. As I pulled out onto the cracked pavement, I felt both cars shift in my mirrors. The one on the left started up. Taillights brightened, engine crackled to life. The one on the right did the same. I eased forward slowly, keeping my eyes on both. They pulled out behind me, following exactly the path I'd taken, but holding back by maybe 30 feet. I watched in the rear view as the left-hand sedan navigated onto Route 89 northbound, and the right-hand sedan turned south onto the little road that led to the river crossing. I blinked, slowed to a crawl, tried to convince myself it was coincidence, timing and fog and two drivers leaving at once. But when I looked again, neither car was there. Empty road ahead, empty gravel lot behind. No skid marks, no headlights fading into the distance, just black pavement reflecting my taillights. I exhaled so hard I almost blew the fog off my rear window. I thumbed the defroster on, then gripped the wheel and drove north, keeping my speed under 30, scanning every curve for signs of those sedans. Nothing. For the next 15 miles, I didn't see a single other car. No trucks, no glimmer of headlights in the fog. I turned the radio dial. Static. An old country station sputtered in and out but played no songs I recognized. I rolled down the windows. Silence, except for the engine and the wind pulling at the edges of the fog. I passed a junction marked Gold Ridge Road and thought about stopping to check my mirrors again, but the thought of stepping out in that empty black mist made me keep going. I wanted home. I wanted my warm apartment. I wanted to look at daylight. At mile marker 103, the fog lifted. Streetlights appeared in the median, a cluster of homes evidenced by lit windows. I pulled into my driveway at exactly 12:07 a.m. No cars in sight, no footprints in the gravel. I leaned back, hands on the wheel, and tried to steady my breathing. In the morning, I told myself I dreamed it. But the next day at work, I found a receipt in my purse for Pine Creek Station, dated for 11:09 p.m., an extra 9 minutes past when I thought I'd paid. I asked a coworker if I sometimes loitered in my car and clocked extra minutes. He laughed and said no, I was punctual. He said receipts print in real time. That meant I was in the station at 11:09 p.m. But I remembered stepping out at 11:03, pumping gas, paying before 11:05. I opened the receipt, Pine Creek Station, pump 2. That was the one nearest the first sedan, the one with the engine off. Pump 2 was on the side I'd stopped. What was I doing in there at 11:09? Later that weekend, I drove back out, not on a dark night, but mid-afternoon, clear sky, warm sun, to see if the station still looked the same. The pumps were rusty, the neon sign gone. Someone had taken the old building too, leaving a skeleton shell of concrete and broken windows. I poked around the lot. No sign of 2 sedans ever parking there. No security camera, no barrier arms, just empty gravel and tufts of grass popping through cracks. I filled my tank at a chain station down the road, paid exactly $20, and kept the quiet hum of regular life going. But every time I drive past where Pine Creek Station used to be, I glance at the gravel and wonder who was sitting behind those dark windows that night, and where they went when I left. I stepped onto my back deck just before midnight. The air was cool for early May, and the sky was so clear you could see every star. I'd been inside for hours, curled up with a book, but when I glanced out the window and saw the moon, full and fat over the maple, I grabbed my phone and dashed outside. I set it on the rail, switched to night mode, and aimed at that glowing orb. My hands were steady. I'd taken pictures of the moon dozens of times, always the same pale craters, the same soft glow. But this time, halfway through the tap to focus, I saw something dart across the moon's face. Not a bird or a cloud. No wings, just a dark shape sliding in a straight line, smooth and silent, cutting the lunar disk in half for maybe a heartbeat. I snapped the photo and hurried to check it. On the small screen, the moon looked perfect, except for a black slash across the top third, like someone had drawn a line with a marker. I zoomed in. The line had depth, a subtle curve, but no edges that looked solid. It was more like a shadow that didn't belong. I set up my tripod and switched to my DSLR, a Canon I'd borrowed from my brother months ago. I snapped 3 more shots before the shadow vanished. In each, the moon was perfect, except for that same strange line, every time in the same spot, shifting ever so slightly. I felt a thrill. Maybe a bat flew close to the lens, or a bug crawled across the sensor. But the line was too crisp, too smooth, too deliberate. I left the camera on the tripod and stepped back, looking up through my binoculars. The moon was unblemished again. Bright, whole, silent. Nothing floated in front of it. No planes overhead, no birds. Just me and the maple branches swaying in the breeze. I brought the images onto my laptop the next morning, during my coffee break. They were still there, the moon sliced by that dark curve in each frame. I stared at the pixels, lowered the contrast, bumped up the exposure. The curve took on a faint metallic sheen, but the rest of the shot stayed the same. Nothing else in the sky, no other anomalies. I showed a coworker, Mark, over lunch. He said it looked like a volcanic shadow, like a plume drifting in front of the moon. But there'd been no eruptions in weeks. We joked that I'd captured a lunar eclipse gone wrong. He laughed, but I saw his brow crease. I printed one of the photos that evening on glossy paper. I clipped it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a snail, my only fridge decoration. I stared at it before bed, the black arc glaring across the bright moon. The rest of the house was quiet. I drifted off around 11:15. The next morning, I found an envelope on the kitchen counter. Plain white, no return address, no stamp imprint. I peeled it open and pulled out the single piece of paper inside. It was my photo, identical to the one on my fridge, but someone had torn out the curved section across the moon, leaving a jagged semicircle cutout. The missing chunk matched exactly the black curve I'd seen. My heart thudded as I turned the photo over. No notes, no words, just blank matte paper. I held it up to the light. Through the hole, I could see the floral print of my countertop. I ran my finger along the torn edge. It felt fresh, fibrous, like someone had cut it out an hour ago. I backed away and looked around the kitchen. Front door was locked, windows closed. I'd come straight home from work yesterday. No stops, no package, no knocks. The envelope must have appeared after midnight or before I woke up. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up. No new messages, no missed calls, just the usual notifications. Weather alert for afternoon showers, a news headline about a minor train delay. Nothing about lunar shadows or stolen moon photos. I stared at the fridge where I'd left the original print. It was gone. The magnet held the empty spot, snail-shaped, and that made me jump. I ran to check behind the fridge. Nothing. No scraps of paper, no photo fragments, just a smooth metal surface. I wrapped the torn photo in an envelope and stuffed it into my bag. At work, I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for the day to end. My screen felt too bright, my chair too stiff. Every time I thought about stepping outside, I imagined someone watching, waiting to slip the real photo away and leave that blank moon postcard. After dinner, I walked the dog around the block, trying to clear my head. The moon was high, full, and unmarred tonight. No shadows crossing it, no shape string. The streetlights cast halos through the humidity, but no figure stepped between me and the glow. The houses looked normal, kids' bikes in driveways, laundry flapping on lines, nothing out of place. I got home and checked my camera bag. Both memory cards were there, still holding those moonshots. I connected the DSLR to my laptop and scrolled through. The arc was in every image. I copied the raw files to a backup drive and closed the lid, hands trembling. Late that night, I thought I heard a soft rustle at the window. I peered out, just leaves brushing in the wind. I leaned closer, trying to peer through the glass, and glimpsed movement in the corner of my eye. A dark shape slipping away from the fence. I blinked. The yard was empty. The maple trees swayed, a single leaf brushing the glass. I went to bed and left the torn photo on the nightstand. The moonlight slanted through the blinds, illuminating the cutout like a keyhole. I stared at it until my eyes grew heavy. I haven't gotten another envelope. I haven't printed the photo again. But I keep the raw files hidden on that backup drive. And every so often, when the moon rises in that exact position over the maple, I half expect to see the shadow flicker across it again. Silent, wingless, precise, and wonder who else is watching. I clipped the leash onto Scout's harness just as the sky was turning lavender, the sun still hidden behind low clouds. It was early May, cool and damp after 2 days of rain. I live on the edge of town, where the sidewalks end and a line of pines begins, so most mornings I walk the dog into the woods for a few minutes before heading home. That morning, I followed the narrow path that skirts the backyards under a tangle of alder branches. Scout nosed at a stump while I shivered in my hoodie and sipped the last of my travel mug. A mist rose off the ground, hanging between the trunks like a thin veil. Then Scout froze. He stood perfectly still, tugging against the leash, ears pricked. I looked up and saw it, a soft glow drifting just above the treetops, maybe 30 feet off the ground. It was oval, pale yellow-white like a street lamp wrapped in silk. No wings, no sound. It didn't so much move as it did slide, slow, smooth, toward a clearing in the pines. My heart skipped. I lifted my phone, but the moment I raised it, the light dipped behind the trees. I flicked on the flashlight app, aimed the beam in the same direction. The woods were empty, just undergrowth and wet needles. I told Scout, "Come on," but he wouldn't budge. He stared at the spot where the light had vanished. I tried coaxing him, calling his name, but he shook his head like a cat, and then he looked back at me, eyes wide. I took a step forward, and he sat down hard, dragging the leash until I stopped. His gaze stayed fixed on that patch of forest. I knelt beside him. The path was empty, no sign of footprints or tracks in the mud. I flicked the phone back to camera mode and panned slowly. Nothing. My hand was shaking, and I pressed the shutter once. No flash, just the gray trees and moss. I checked the photo. No light, no anything unusual. I clipped Scout's harness off and let him off leash so we could head back the same way. He bounded ahead, but I turned around every few steps, half expecting to see that glow drift out from behind the trees. Nothing followed us. Back at the yard, I closed the gate and watched Scout sniff the grass. The rest of the day felt off. My skin prickled as if something was watching me from the corners of rooms. I kept glancing at the living room window, half expecting to see a pale glow sliding past. That night, I set up my old security cameras, cheap Wi-Fi units I'd bought online around the front door. I plugged them in, tested the angles, then went to bed around 10:30. Scout slept at my feet. I left the cameras recording motion-triggered clips just in case. I woke to my phone buzzing at 7 a.m., a notification, camera 1, motion detected at 3:17 a.m. My heart sank. I tapped it open. The footage was gone, just a black screen where the video should have been. I reloaded the app, checking camera 2, same blank file. Camera 3, blank. I stared at my phone, heart thundering. Then I noticed one clip hadn't overwritten. It was camera 1, at 3:17 exactly, but only 4 seconds long. I tapped play. Grainy black and white front porch. The timestamp blinked in the corner. The doorbell rang twice, slow and deliberate. I sat up straighter. The shot widened on two figures standing close together in the dim glow of the streetlight. They wore dark suits, jackets buttoned, ties straight, white shirts, polished shoes. Their hair was neat, no hats. Both faces were tilted down, too dark to see features, only the shine of their shoes and the stiff angle of their shoulders. They didn't move except to lift one hand each to the doorbell. Then they stood back a step, motionless. After the second ring, the clip ended. No audio, only the faint hum of the streetlight. I rewound, played it again. They didn't blink or shift weight. It looked like a dollhouse scene, perfectly still, except for the doorbell lights flashing. I zoomed in. No badge, no briefcase. Just two men in black suits at my door at 3:17 a.m. My hands shook so hard I had to set the phone down. Scout stirred on the bed behind me. I checked the hallway light. Off. The front door peered at me from the darkness. I didn't want to look at it. I texted a friend to come over, said nothing about why. He rang the doorbell twice just to test and left. Nothing. All day I felt heavy, watched. I rewound the morning's video feed again, black screens everywhere except that one snippet. I downloaded it, emailed it to myself, I deleted the app and reinstalled it. The blank cams stayed blank. The 4-second clip was the only thing left. That night, I left the cameras unplugged. I set a cheap desk lamp in the hallway instead of the red bulb. Scout slept on the bed again. I left the door unlocked, couldn't face listening for bells at 3 a.m. I woke at 2:45 a.m. to the sound of rain pattering on the porch roof. I drifted back to sleep. At 3:17, I sat straight up, wide awake, but no doorbell, just rain. Scout was curled beside me, breathing steady. In the morning, I played the clip again, staring at those two silhouettes. I thought about clearing the memory card, tossing the cameras, but I saved the file, moved it to a USB key, locked it in my desk drawer. I walk Scout past the edge of the pines every morning still, but I don't stop in the clearing. I don't lift my phone. I don't watch for lights. I tell myself it was just a glitch or a prank. But Scout's eyes still flick to the tree line when we pass. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear a doorbell echo through the rain, soft and quiet, like a promise. I was wiping down the counter at Black Rock Cafe just as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Outside, the sky over the old quarry was bruised purple, just the way people said they saw weird lights there. I'd heard it all night. Flash stories, rumors of glowing orbs bouncing off the limestone walls. None of it mattered to me until a customer who called himself John leaned in and said, "You ever see anything up at Miller's Pit? Last night I was driving home and these orange spheres just hovered over the blasted rock face. No sound, just... They hovered, and then they blinked out." I nodded and poured his espresso, half listening, half focused on the milk steaming too hot. He kept talking. 15 feet wide at least. I wanted to get out and get a photo, but as soon as I hit record, it flickered, like it didn't want to be on camera. He shrugged as he sipped. Maybe I was seeing things. He tipped back in his chair, staring at the empty road beyond the window. I was about to ask more, figured I'd heard the story before, when the door chimed. In walked a man in a black suit, no tie, crisp white shirt, shoes polished enough to reflect the neon cafe sign. He paused in the threshold, scanning the room like someone doing a head count, but he didn't meet my eyes. He didn't order anything. Instead, he walked straight to the table where John sat and slipped into the booth opposite him. The cafe was practically empty, just me, John, and one other regular zoned out over a latte, and when the stranger sat down, the fluorescent lights overhead seemed to dull. John froze, mid-sip, his brow furrowed. He set the cup down and said, "Can I help you?" The man just stared, hands flat on the table, shoulders locked. He didn't nod or glance at the menu board. After a long beat, He said in a quiet, even tone, "Tell me about the lights." That was it. No apology, no hello. He didn't flash any ID or business card. John swallowed and said, I was just talking about them. I saw lights. Orange, hovering. The man leaned forward a fraction and asked, "Where exactly?" He spoke like a machine, each word deliberate. John rattled off the back roads, naming gravel cutoffs and abandoned cabins. The man didn't take notes. He just nodded once and sat back, expressionless. I cleared the counter, heart thumping. Every few seconds I glanced over, half expecting the stranger to dissolve into mist like one of those alleged orbs. But he stayed there, watching John. Not leaning in, not scribbling, just sitting perfectly still. When John finished his cup, he pushed back his chair, said, "I've got to go." The man didn't move. John's eyes flicked to me, and he gave a small wave like he needed me to acknowledge something about the guy. I nodded, dropped the tip jar into the register, wiped my palms on my apron, and watched John stand. The man in black said, "Be safe." His voice was too flat for comfort, like a robot trying sincerity. John hesitated, then hurried out without looking back. He sent me a text 2 minutes later. He's still sitting there. I looked. Empty booth. The suit was gone. No one else in the cafe, just a faint scent of cinnamon and espresso. I locked the register and turned off the neon sign as the other regular left. The door latched behind me with a final click. My hands shook as I flipped the closed sign over. I walked out to the parking lot under that bruised sky, half expecting the man to be leaning against the passenger side of my car, but there was nothing. Just John's Prius at the curb, wrapped in fog. I got in my beat-up sedan and drove home on Route 47, windows down, despite the chill. The quarry lay on my right, silent and dark except for the distant glow of a single street lamp. I fought the urge to turn into the gravel access road, even though I knew better than to chase a ghost story in the dark. At home, I set my keys on the hallway table and flicked on every light. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no unknown texts. The only message was John's. I stared at it, wondering if maybe he'd gone back to be watched again. I booted up my laptop to play some music, but the quiet click of the fan sounded too loud, too mechanical. I reached for the phone to text him back, "You okay?" But stopped. What could I say? I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching the steam curl upward. Outside, soft headlights passed on the street. I thought I saw a dark shape at the window. No, just the neighbor's cat. My heart eased slightly. I opened my laptop and pulled up the local news site. Nothing unusual. Municipal meetings, a story about a high school band, someone's missing cat. No mentions of lights or suits or secret meetings in coffee shops. Sleep didn't come easy. I checked the alarm clock at 1:03 a.m., then again at 1:19. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps on gravel. I lay awake until 3:30, half expecting a knock on the door. Morning light felt weak and pale. I brewed coffee and stared out the window at the empty street. I considered calling John. Maybe he'd seen the man again, maybe he'd had his lights flicker back on, but I didn't call. I just poured the coffee, adding too much cream so it tasted sweet. I left the house at 7:15 for my shift, same route past the quarry. Headlights cut like knives through the mist. Pine trees loomed on either side. No glow, no sign of anyone standing by the cut line. I parked at the cafe lot and braced myself before stepping inside. The door chime rang. I set down my keys and forced a smile for the morning rush. A few regulars sat at the counter, but no suits, no staring. The neon sign hummed back to life. I wiped the bar top and wondered if the man was still out there, somewhere in the fog, taking notes, waiting for another sighting. I handed a cappuccino to a customer named Marisol and leaned against the edge of the counter. She said, "You okay? You look tired." I shrugged. "Long night." She nodded and sipped her drink. I glanced at the empty booth where John and the stranger had sat. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck like someone was watching from outside. I looked through the window, just mist and cones of streetlight. I turned back and tossed my cloth into the rag bin. The espresso machine hissed. I dropped a puck into the knockbox and reached for beans for the next grinder. The lights overhead felt too bright, too harsh. I thought about closing early, but I put on a soundtrack of mellow jazz instead. Lunch came and went. No one asked about the quarry lights. No one mentioned a man in a suit. It was like last night hadn't happened, or like everyone agreed not to ask. By evening, the quarry had faded into memory. I locked up at 9:15, set the alarm, and walked to my car. The sky was clear, the stars steady points of light. As I drove away, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark eyes, pale face, a question left hanging. I didn't look back. I kept going, headlights on, fog behind me fading, waiting for something new to blur the line between what I'd seen and what I'd been told. I was up on Eagle Ridge right after midnight, hunched over my telescope eyepiece. I'd driven my old Jeep up the service road at dusk, parked next to the weathered plywood shack I'd built last summer, and hauled in my Celestron 8-inch on its Dobsonian mount. The air was cool, just warm enough that I didn't need a heavy coat. The sky was clear, no moon, only a handful of planets and thousands of stars. I had my eye on one in particular, an unremarkable point in Cygnus I'd been tracking for months. Amateur catalogs called it blink star, because when you increased magnification past 200 times, it would wink out for a few seconds, then come back. I'd attributed it to atmospheric ripple or an equipment glitch. But tonight felt different. I set the eyepiece to 250 Ks, focused until the star was pinprick sharp, and watched. In the first minute, it blinked 3 times. Nothing unusual there. I'd seen it do that before. Then, around 12:13 a.m., I glanced at my phone clock and the star blinked out. I waited. 20 seconds later, it reappeared. I jotted down the interval in my notebook. 20.4 seconds. I reset the scope to 300 times. Blink, blink, back. But then, after the third reappearance, the eyepiece went black for a full minute. I checked the lens cap. Off. I swapped eyepieces. Still black. My pulse sped up. I leaned back and peered through the finder scope. Perfect sky, every star in place, except nothing where blink stars should be. The area was empty. I checked the main mount's power cable. Plugged. The red LED on the mount's control box blinked slowly. I pressed the override button. The computers flickered, the motors whirred. The star field returned, but no blink star. Not in the eyepiece, not in the finder. I rummaged in my bag for the smartphone adapter, attached it, and took a quick photo. The image processed, tiny stars like diamonds on black velvet, but still no star in that spot. I rubbed my eyes, checked the phone's timestamp, 12:17 a.m. When I looked up with my own eyes, a dim light hovered behind the ridge across the valley. Nothing like the blinking star, just a soft glow, orange against the pines. At first I thought it was headlights, maybe some late-night hunter or hiker's lantern, but the glow didn't move. It stayed for 5 minutes, then faded. I recorded the moment in my notebook. Then I noticed something else. My watch was 2 minutes slow. I always synced it to phone time before I left. I checked my phone, still reading 12:19. I pressed refresh on the NTP server app, no connection. Cell service was dead. I grabbed my handheld ham radio, new battery last week, and keyed the mic. This is Alpha Sierra November. Does anyone copy? Static. I waited. Nothing. I tried again, louder. No voice answered. I tried the lower power repeater channel. Dead. By then my fingers were numb. I poked at my phone. Camera, weather app, compass. Everything was frozen. I tapped the screen. The home button only vibrated. Finally, I held power until it rebooted. The clock reset to 12:20 a.m. I opened the camera roll. My blink star photos from earlier were gone. No images at all. The gallery only held a selfie I'd taken at sundown. I leaned against the tripod, heart pounding. The ridge light hadn't returned. The sky still glittered untouched. I unhooked the telescope's power cable, kicked in the manual mode, and aimed it by hand at the coordinates I'd recorded. The mount groaned. The star field looked right, but the star was missing again. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. On impulse, I checked my truck's clock, 11:17. Even that was a full hour off. I shook my head, tried to piece things together, and realized I'd been up here since 7 p.m., maybe longer, but I couldn't trust any time reference. I decided to pack up and head down. I turned off the mount's motors and swung the scope around to the cabin door for storage, but snagged halfway and refused to budge. I tugged harder. The mount hummed as if powered, though it wasn't. With a final jerk, it released and slammed against the plywood. The eyepiece shattered. I yanked the mount's power cord. Silence. The valley was still. No ridge glow, no radio static, no blinking star. By the time I loaded the broken telescope in the back of the Jeep, the sky had begun to pale. I glanced up. Cygnus was gone, replaced by pre-dawn haze. I drove down the gravel road with headlights on low beam, unsure where every turn was. I keyed my phone's GPS, no signal. I switched to offline maps, still no path visible. I took the wrong fork twice, finally found the main road by sheer luck, and headed home. When I got to my driveway, it was 6:02 a.m. on the dashboard clock, matching the sunrise. I shut off the engine and sat there breathing hard. The eyepiece shards were in a paper bag on the passenger seat. My notebook was in the glove box, open to scribbled times and intervals and one note. Ridge light. Glow lasted 5 minutes. Inside, the house was quiet. My phone finally got service. 8 missed calls from my brother and one from a number I didn't recognize. I called him back. He said he'd texted, asking about dinner. I apologized. He said that was weird because I'd answered his first call at 7 a.m. I told him I was fine. I checked my inbox. No texts from that unknown number. No voicemail. The photos I'd managed to save were still in my camera's memory card. Shaky shots of the star and flickers of darkness. But every timestamp said the files all named img.jpg. I dropped the eyepiece into my desk drawer, shut the drawer, and rubbed my eyes. I glanced at the clock. 6:35 a.m. Too early to go back to bed. Later that day, I drove up to the observatory to download the mount's logs. Maybe they recorded power surges or firmware errors. But the control box was gone, wrenched off its shelf with rough gouges in the plywood walls. The mount itself was missing. Only jagged metal shavings on the floor marked where it'd been. I walked back through the woods in the afternoon light. The ridge was still and empty. No hunters, no lights, no signs of equipment. Just trees and rocks. I still look up at the stars every night, but I don't go back to Eagle Ridge. Once in a while, I catch a glimpse of a dim point in Cygnus that twitches, but I don't linger. I tell friends I lost interest in Blinkstar. I tell myself that makes sense. And I swear sometimes in the darkest hour before dawn, I hear the soft hum of a mount's motors spinning into place, but there's nothing there but empty sky. I pulled off the gravel road just before sunrise, engine ticking as it cooled. The morning fog hung low over my cornfield, thick enough that I couldn't see the far edge. I grabbed my thermos and flashlight, locked the cab, and headed out to check the new irrigation lines I'd laid last week. The air smelled like damp earth and green stalks. As I walked between the rows, I noticed something odd ahead. The corn was missing. At first, I thought I'd misremembered where the new lines ran, but when I got closer, the stalks ended abruptly against perfectly straight lines. I crouched and ran a hand over the cut stalks. No ragged edges, just smooth, even shears about waist high. The flattened area formed a hexagon, each side exactly as long as the next. I shone my flashlight over the ground. Every stalk leaned at the same angle, pressed into the soil like someone had ironed it flat. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to show how anyone got in or out. I stood up and circled the pattern. The fog muted all sound. Even the birds were quiet. I looked back toward the farmhouse, still too far to make out details, and sat down on a cut stalk to collect my thoughts. My boots pressed into damp soil. Every step into the flattened patch left a clear heel imprint, but outside those 6 sides, the ground was untouched. Not a single track across the perimeter. I walked back to the barn, wondering if a weather balloon or an ag drone gone wrong could explain it. My black lab Bess caught sight of me at the door and ran out, tail wagging. She sniffed at the flattened corn and looked up at me, whining once, then padded back toward the house. I didn't blame her for wanting to leave. By mid-morning, the fog lifted and the sun burned off the last of the chill. I refilled the water trough and tightened a loose bolt on the pump, still thinking about that hexagon. I'd plowed hundreds of acres in my life, and I'd never seen anything like it. I tried to call my neighbor Rick, but got his voicemail. I texted a photo from the edge of the field, the stalks bent low and gleaming in the sunlight, but my phone said sent without a timestamp. Odd, but maybe the tower was just slow out here. At noon, I climbed into my pickup and emptied 3 ice-cold sodas on ice for when I got back to the shop. The truck's AC didn't work, so I drove with the windows down, dust settling in the cab. My shirt was damp with sweat when I reached the equipment shed. I grabbed a wrench and set off to check the planter's drive belt. I always felt safer around machinery than around stumps of snapped corn. That's when I saw them. Two men stepped out of the tree line along the north edge of the field, 12 feet apart, mirroring each other's stride. Both wore black suits, jackets buttoned, white shirts, narrow black ties. Neither carried a bag or hat. No sunglasses, but their eyes were hidden in shadow. They walked with that slow, measured pace you see in airport security guards, the exact same gait. Between them, they carried nothing but a glint of sunlight off polished shoes. I froze, wrench in hand. They didn't hurry or greet me. They just reached the corner of the flattened patch and stopped. The taller one looked down at the bent stalks, then at me, without expression. I set the wrench on a crate, wiped my hands on my jeans, and said, "Can I help you fellas?" The shorter one tilted his head slightly and asked, "Did anything change in the soil?" He sounded like he was reading off a card. Flat, practiced. I pointed at the hexagon. "I've been farming this land for 20 years. The soil's soil. It gets compacted sometimes, but this," I waved at the clean lines, "this isn't natural." The tall one agreed. "No tracks, no debris. A geometric flattening suggests external pressure evenly applied." He crouched, ran a gloved finger across the soil. "Did you apply herbicide?" I shook my head. "No, nothing like that. I'd have seen the signs on the monitor, and it'd kill the plants, not lay them over neatly." He stood and brushed off his pants. "What about subsoil irrigation? Any new pipes?" I realized my phone was ringing. It was Rick. I ignored it and said, "The new lines run south of the east field. This is north." They nodded as if it confirmed they'd already checked their notes. The shorter man asked, "Any seismic activity overnight? Vibrations?" I thought back to the fog, the morning calm. No sirens, no quakes, nothing on the news. If that pattern happened from below, I'd see cracked soil or upheaval. I paused and added, "Pipes wouldn't bend plants like that." They glanced at each other without speaking. Then the tall one said, "Stay off the area for 72 hours. Like, soil sample kits are en route." He reached into his jacket and handed me a plain envelope, white, the kind you get from government offices, stamped with a code I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet, a list of test protocols and a date exactly 3 days ahead. No letterhead, no signature, just instructions to await technician arrival. I looked up. The men were watching my face. I asked, "Who are you?" He said, "An appropriate liaison." The other man stepped back into the trees without another word. The first followed, both disappearing into the maple and oak beyond the field, leaving only birdsong in their wake. I stood alone at the edge of that flattened corn, holding the envelope. The sun was high now, turning the stalks yellow around the perimeter. I turned the paper over, no backside printing. I stuck it in my back pocket, grabbed the wrench, and returned to the shed, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. That evening, I checked the envelope again. I found an official folder tucked inside my toolbox. Same plain white paper, same code stamped on the cover. Under the fluorescent shop light, the edges of the folder showed no adhesive, no staples. Someone must have put it there while I wasn't looking. I drove home on the lane road, dust cloud behind the truck, sweat cooling on my neck. Bess rode in the passenger seat, ears back. At the mailbox, I paused, staring at the envelope in my pocket. I tossed it inside and slammed the lid. No one stopped to watch. In my kitchen, I boiled a pot of water and poured over instant coffee. I flicked through channels, nothing but reruns and weather. The only thing on the local news was a road closure 90 miles away. Night fell. I stood in the back doorway, listening to crickets beneath the stars. The flattened pattern looked small from here, a pale scar in my mind. Tomorrow I'd mark the field and avoid that patch until the technicians came. Until then, the soil would keep its silence secret, and I'd keep checking for tracks that never appeared. I was halfway through my shift at Dry Mesa Radio Observatory when the static started. It was just after 10 p.m., a windless September night with a sky so clear you could see Milky Way stretching over the southern dish. I'd set up my folding chair next to the control shack, coffee in hand, scanning the telemetry readouts for any stray transmissions. The dishes track cosmic noise, sunspots, that sort of thing, mostly background hiss. But at 10:17, the left-hand monitor trailed off into a sputter of white noise, then went dead silent for a beat before snapping back on with the faintest pulse, like someone tapping a mic 20 feet away. I frowned, tapped the screen. No error messages. The other 3 dishes were normal. I keyed the handheld radio. Control to dish 4. Anything on your end? No answer. The silence was comfortable out here, usually. But that night, it felt too deep. I stood and crouched behind the shack, peered around the corner. The array of dishes sprawled across the plateau, polished steel in moonlight, each one pointing at a different slice of sky. Nothing was moving. No trucks, no lights, no wind. I forced a laugh and returned to my chair, logged the glitch in the shift log, and sat back down. At 11:03 p.m., I heard something over the radio. That same soft tapping, but now it was synced across all channels. I ran to the dish controls and muted them. The tapestries of static fell silent, leaving only the hum of the generator. Then I saw it, a pale amber light, like a slow-burning ember, moving just above the western horizon. It didn't zip like a plane, didn't flicker or blink. It drifted, maybe 20 degrees above the mesas, heading south. I grabbed binoculars from the rack. The light was too small to judge shape, but it had a gentle glow, not a headlight beam. No strobes, no contrail. Just a single orb of light moving at what looked like walking pace, except it would have been 1,000 feet up. I switched the binoculars for my telephoto lens and mounted it on the tripod. Framed the horizon between 2 dishes. The light held steady, then dipped below the rim of the mesa. I tracked the spot where it vanished and heard the generator hiccup, a cough of fuel. When it came back, the light was gone. I double-checked the logging software. The power draw had dipped for 6 seconds. The readouts on the dish motors flickered, then stabilized. Nothing indicated any external interference. No spikes in the grid, no radar returns on the base scanners. I pulled on a jacket and walked to the fence, staring down the slope into the scrub. The horizon was empty. Only the usual scrub pines and the ranch road cutting through. I spent the next hour pacing between dishes, listening for rotor wash or engine hum. My phone had no signal out here, no cell, no internet, so I couldn't even look up aircraft notices. I radioed the on-duty astronomer on the hilltop station, but got static back. Finally, I climbed back in the shack, scribbled anomaly at 11:03 in the log, and went back to watching for cosmic rays. Morning came gray and cool. The maintenance crew arrived right on schedule, truck engines rolling up the hill by 6:30. I grabbed my clipboard and went out to meet them, wondering if anyone else had spotted the light. At the gate, 2 men in black suits were standing by the guardhouse. No badges, no hats, shirts crisp and starched. Neither so much as looked at me. I swiped my ID badge and swiped it again. Still valid. I raised my hand and said, "Morning, Dan Clyde." They turned simultaneously. The taller one said, "Marcus Hall?" He didn't smile. I nodded. "That's me. You two knew?" He checked his phone, didn't look down, then handed me a manila folder. "Review this." The other man stood back, hands clasped. His tie was perfectly straight, shoes unscuffed. They spoke in low tones, too low for me to catch, but I caught fragments. Shift log, omit, discuss offline. I opened the folder. Inside was a printout of my entry, 11:3 anomaly, with a box checked classified. Below that, typed in a block font, "Do not discuss incident with anyone. Authority level, black site access required." I looked up. The shorter man said, "That was last night's anomaly. You saw nothing." He paused. "Do you understand?" I swallowed. "But I saw the light. It moved." I pointed west. It passed behind the mesa. The taller man took a step forward, expression polite but cold. "No such movement registered on our sensor arrays. No power fluctuation, no radio interference. You reported a spurious signal. That's all." I frowned. "Then why?" My words caught in my throat. The folder snapped shut in his hand. He said, "You're cleared for standard duty, but you will not log or speak of the incident again." His voice was neutral, final. He handed the folder back, turned on his heel, and the other man followed him through the gate. They didn't get in a car. They just walked down the hill, footsteps crunching in unison until the scrub pines swallowed them. I stood there, the gate's metal latch swinging in the morning breeze, that folder heavy in my hand. I went back to the control shack and tore out the log page with the anomaly entry. I tossed it in the burn barrel behind the generator shed, watched the wind curl the smoke toward the dishes. My stomach ached. The sky overhead was pale blue, a falcon wheeling above the array, eyes sharp for field mice. At lunch, I scanned the shift logs. No entry for 11:03. No note of power dip, no mention of radio glitch. It was like I'd never written it. My hands shook as I sipped coffee from the break room pot. I stared at the window, waiting for that amber light to drift back into view. That afternoon, the dish motors hummed through calibrations. The astronomer called in for clear data. I punched the keys, the sensors all checked out, no anomalies. I watched the sunset through the east window, hued orange and red behind the antennae. On my way home, I stopped at the junction above the mesa. The mesa's rim cut a clean line against the sky. I sat in the car for a long time, headlights off, radio silent, no lights dipped over the horizon, no humming, nothing but the scent of pinon and juniper. When I drove down the gravel road toward my trailer, I felt eyes on me from the ridge. I glanced up. Empty. I kept going until the lights of town appeared, small dots on the darkness. At home, I opened a fresh notebook and wrote, September 12th, 11:03 p.m., observed slow-moving amber light dip below mesa. Power generator hiccup, sensor panel reset, radio silence, no radar returns, folder labeled classified, instructed to omit. I read it twice, closed the book, and locked it in my drawer. Outside, the night settled without a sound. I lay in bed, listening to the trailer's metal roof creak under a high wind. When I closed my eyes, I saw that light again, steady glow, descending over bare rock, disappearing like someone had lowered a lamp behind a curtain, and two men in black suits, faces unreadable, telling me what I could and couldn't see. I took off from Pine Valley Airstrip just after 5 in the afternoon, the sun still high and hot over southern Oregon. I'm an amateur pilot, just me and a Cessna 172 rented from the local flying club. My plan was to circle over the Rogue River Canyon, catch some landscape photography, then head back before sunset. No big deal. As I climbed to 3,500 feet, the wind kicked up from the west. The radio crackled with chatter about a small brush fire near Dry Creek Road. They said the fire crews had it contained, but the smoke plume was visible 50 miles away. I figured I'd swing past just for a look. The corridor over the canyon was clear, so I banked east and pointed the plane toward the haze rising in the distance. By 5:25, I was over the fire. Below me, the ground was a patchwork of red-orange flames and blackened earth. The heat rose against the belly of the plane, no turbulence, but a subtle shudder, like driving over a rough spot at high speed. I dialed my camera for a closer shot when something caught my eye above the smoke. 6 glowing orbs, silent and still, hovered maybe 100 feet above the tree line. They were pale, almost white at first glance, but when I zoomed in, they had a soft amber core surrounded by a thin halo. They formed a loose V shape, each orb spaced about 30 feet from its neighbor, moving as one with the breeze. No prop wash, no flicker of strobe, just gentle drift. I blinked and reached to steady the camera. The orbs didn't blink, didn't make a sound. The radio chatter in the background sounded distant. Even the engine noise felt muted. I rolled the window down a crack and strained to listen. Nothing but the hum of the propeller and the rush of wind. I thought about calling flight service to report a possible drone or hot air lanterns, but something held me back. I watched for maybe 2 minutes until the orbs drifted apart, one on each side, like they were dispersing into the woods. I snapped a few more shots, then banked north to climb out of the thermal updraft. By 5:40, I was clear of the smoke and headed back to Pine Valley. My camera's memory card filled with photos of fire lines and burned pines, and a handful of grainy shots of those orbs. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was probably some kind of containment balloon experiment. Something the fire district set loose to monitor air currents. I radioed the tower and got clearance to land on runway 21. The strip was empty except for a fuel truck idling near the hangar. I taxied in, cut the engine, and stepped out into the cool late afternoon air. 2 mechanics waved, but I gave them a quick nod and headed for the pilot's lounge to download my photos. That's when he appeared. He was tall and lean, wearing a black suit that didn't quite match the dusty tarmac. No pilot's wings, no name tag, just dark glasses and a slim black tie. He approached me with a measured stride, hands clasped behind his back. I thought maybe he was one of the fire district officials. He held out his hand. "Captain Lewis?" he said, voice smooth. I shook his hand only because he seemed polite. His grip was firm, dry. I said, "Yeah, that's me. Richard Lewis, you with the fire department?" He shook his head. "Just a concerned observer. You saw those orbs over Dry Creek, correct?" My stomach nodded. "Yeah. I was circling the fire, got some shots." He nodded slowly. "You've seen too much. I'd appreciate if you file that sighting as a weather balloon release. The county does occasional upper air launches near Prospect. Wind data." He pronounced prospect as if it were a code word. I frowned. Weather balloons? At night? And 6 of them drifting low over a forest fire? He smiled, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. "Routine. No need to report anything unusual." He handed me a plain white card stamped with the airstrip logo and phone number. "Call this line tomorrow and say balloon release confirmed. They'll know what you mean." I pocketed the card. He turned and walked away, posture straight, as if someone had just pressed play on a music box. No goodbye, no hesitation. I watched him get into a black SUV parked next to the hangar. The engine didn't roar, just a low growl, and the vehicle melted into the parking lot's shade until it was gone. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty asphalt. Then I walked into the lounge and checked the photos. The orbs were there in every frame, soft, perching above the smoke, then gone in the next shots. I downloaded them onto a flash drive and plugged in my camera for charging. My hands were shaking enough that I spilled coffee into the gutter. When I called the number the next morning, just as he said, I got a generic recording. "Weather balloon release confirmed at 5:20 p.m. Thank you. Over and out." No name, no follow-up questions. I haven't mentioned it to any friends at the club. No one I know flies near that fire district after dark. Every time I look at the photos, I see those 6 amber circles glowing in the gloom, perfectly still, and I wonder what they were tracking. I keep the flash drive hidden in my console. I tell myself they're weather balloons. If I say it enough, I might believe it. I heard the door chime at exactly 11:02 p.m., but when I looked up from the counter, I saw no one walking in, just the empty double doors and the dull hum of the neon open sign. I glanced at the clock behind me, 11:02, and then back out the front window. A black sedan sat under the lone street lamp, headlights off, engine idling so quietly I barely heard it over the air conditioner. I was 7 hours into my night shift at Green's 24-hour mini-mart, and I'd never seen that car before. I folded my arms and pretended not to notice. The clerk before me said, "Can I help you?" But he was wrong place, wrong time. The sedan stayed there, broad at the shoulders and low to the ground, like someone had rubbed polish over the entire body. In overnights, you get ghosts, drunk drivers, college kids looking for snacks, but almost never someone who just sits there for hours. By midnight, I'd rung up exactly 12 customers, a mix of kids buying Red Bulls and one guy buying dog biscuits at 3 a.m., and the sedan never moved. I counted how many cigarettes I'd sold. 35. I refilled the snack rack and gazed out the window. No lights moved in the lot except for the single filament bulb overhead, ticking like a slow clock. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Even Scout, the store cat, hunkered down behind the chips aisle, tail wrapped around her paws. At 1:17, my soda cooler buzzed and flickered off for 2 seconds. The power surge was small, enough that my fluorescent lights dimmed, but the coffee machine kept running. That convinced me it wasn't the whole block, just the store's wiring. I muttered to myself and went to reset the breaker in the back room. When I opened the fuse box, the breaker for aisle 3 had tripped. I flipped it back and watched the lights return. Back at the counter, I considered calling my manager, but figured I'd mention it tomorrow. At 2:45, a drip started in the ceiling by the back door. Water, cold and clear, landing in a small puddle on the concrete floor. I grabbed a mop and bucket, found the leak right under the air duct. I inspected the duct. No condensation, no dropped pipe. The drip slowed after 5 minutes, then stopped. I emptied the bucket outside. The lot was empty, the sedan gone. I figured maybe the driver stopped nodding off. The air smelled musty now, like wet carpet. I circled back inside. Scout rushed out from under the counter, rubbing my leg. The drip hadn't woken anyone. I checked the restrooms, dry. I shrugged and grabbed a coffee. By 3:30, the store was quiet again. The bug zapper over the door sizzled twice. A chill cut through the store even though the AC was set on cool. I shivered and pulled my hoodie tighter. That's when I noticed the sedan rolling forward 3 feet. No driver's silhouette in the window. The passenger door opened, but no one stepped out. The door closed on its own and the car rolled back, unchanged, as if on invisible tracks. That was enough. I walked to the front doors, aimed my flashlight at the vehicle. No one inside. No movement. The engine was off now, and the thick tires blocked any sound of it starting again. I went back to the counter, rubbed my eyes, and stared at the security monitors. None of the cameras covered the parking lot well. The angle missed the driver's seat. I hit the view back lot button, tried to pan the camera, but the feed cut to static, then returned to normal after 4 seconds. The only thing frozen in pixelated gray was the front of the black sedan. I stared at the screen until the static cleared. The car remained unchanged. I pressed the record button. The feed continued, no glitches. By 4:50, I'd had one more customer, a young woman buying trail mix. She stared at me, then at the lot, and said, "Is something out there?" I said no, just an old car. She nodded and left. When the doors closed, I checked again. The sedan's roof was empty. I clocked over to the break room at 5:30 and opened the refrigerator. My sandwich was gone. I'd left turkey and cheese, but someone else had taken it. No note, no wrapper in the wastebasket. Just empty plastic. I thought maybe the night janitor had come in early, but I hadn't heard anyone. My shift ended at 6 a.m. The sky was already staining gray. I counted down the minutes, ringing up 2 more people who paid cash for lottery tickets and beef jerky. At 6:02, I hit the button to open the doors. The chime sounded, and I grabbed my jacket. I walked out to the lot, expecting the sedan to still sit there, mocking me. But the lot was empty. No car. No footprints in the gravel. No oil spots. I checked the side door exit. It was locked and no one had tried to pry it. My phone buzzed. A text from the manager saying, "Leave the key under the mat tonight. Maintenance at 10. I hadn't told her the fridge thing, hadn't mentioned the car, nothing. I answered, "Got it." I walked to my car, keys in hand, and stopped. A black SUV sat idling in front of the convenience store across the road. A man in a black suit sat in the driver's seat. Jacket buttoned, tie narrow, hands flat on the wheel. He stared at me without blinking. My pulse spiked. I raised a hand in greeting. He opened his door and stepped onto the street without a sound. I walked closer, keeping my jacket zipped. The morning was cool under my breath. He said, "You won't remember this conversation." His voice was low but clear. He reached into his jacket pocket and pressed a small card into my palm. I saw the edges, white, blank, and in the corner a single line of type, "Do not recall." I blinked. He stepped back, got into the SUV, and drove away without headlights, tires rolling silent on asphalt. I stood there holding the card. When I looked down, the text was gone. My hand was empty. I glanced across the road. The store's doors were closed, lights still on inside. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away without looking back. I rounded the last bend before the radar station, just as the sun slipped below the jagged horizon. It was near 8 o'clock on a late July evening. Still warm, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin even after the engine's off. I was alone in my Toyota, windows down, a can of cheap iced tea sweating in the cup holder. The radio was stuck between stations, static crackling in time with the whine of the tires on the asphalt. I'd taken the gravel cutoff because traffic on Highway 89 had been crawling all day, and I wanted to stretch my legs before the long haul home. The road ran past Radar Site Echo, those big white domes you see in pictures of secret bases, though it was mostly just abandoned admin buildings and a single guard shack. No one ever seemed to be around. As I slowed for a sharp corner, my headlights swept across the hillside and caught something. A flash of silver, thin and elongated like a shard of metal skimming across the sky. It darted east to west faster than a jet. No roar, no contrail, just a quick streak of molten metal against the twilight. I jammed on the brakes and the car fishtailed in the loose gravel. Heart pounding, I threw the truck into park and hopped out. The heat hit me first, then the silence. I set my iced tea on the roof, wiped sweat from my neck, and raised my head to scan the sky. Nothing. just the darkening blue, a single star hovering over the dome. I clicked my phone's flashlight on and shone it up the hill. The trees were still and the radar dome glowed in my headlights, lifeless and round. I stared for maybe 15 seconds thinking I'd imagined the whole thing when I heard crunching behind me. I spun around. A black SUV sat in the middle of the road, too big for it, engine idling, windows up, no lights on. I didn't remember seeing it pull in. The bushes blocked the view. For a second I thought it was empty, but then the passenger door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and lean, dark hair slicked back, wearing a crisp black suit with a narrow tie. No badge, no name tag, no hat. His hands were in his pockets. He didn't shine a flashlight. He just stood looking at me, face calm. I swallowed and pointed at the sky. "Did you see something up there?" He tilted his head toward the hillside. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice soft and even. "This road doesn't go anywhere. Keep driving." I frowned. "There's nothing past that dome except dead end and a drop-off toward the river." I paused. "What road does go somewhere?" He took a step forward. "None that matters." The gravel crunched under his shoes. "Move along." I glanced past him at the darkness beyond the dome. Thick woods, steep slope, no trail. My throat felt tight. I said, "I saw something up there, a silver object." I jabbed my thumb at the sky. He shook his head, eyes fixed on mine. There was nothing up there. He straightened, then looked past me as if answering someone beside me. "Just drive." My chest throbbed. I looked back at the hill. No object, no glare, no movement, only the white dome and the tree line. I turned back to him. He stood half in shadow, half in the SUV's faint glow. I could almost see the faint crease of a smile, but it never reached his eyes. "Am I in the wrong place?" I asked. My voice sounded small, echoing in the empty road. He nodded, slowly, deliberately, and slipped a folded card into my hand. Y89 North, no detours. I looked at the card under my flashlight. Plain white, no logo, just typed text. Open quote, "Keep moving, no stops, watch the sky." Close quote. I looked up. He was back in the SUV, door closed, engine still running. The taillights glowed dim red. I swallowed the card and slid into the driver's seat without locking the door. My hands trembled on the wheel. The SUV backed up 3 feet, then stopped. I put the car in gear. The SUV followed, directly behind, as I crept forward. I thought about refusing, about pulling my phone out and taking a picture, anything to keep proof, but my hands shook too much to find the button. At the T intersection, I turned north onto the main road. Every time I glanced in the rear view, the SUV was still there, following just close enough to see those dark lenses staring ahead. After maybe half a mile, I hit a stretch of smooth pavement and pressed the accelerator. The SUV vanished instantly. No headlights fading, no reflection in my mirrors, nothing. I kept going north at speed until the highway lights broke through the pine shadows. The night air changed, the radio came back, an old country song playing. I pulled over at the next gas station, heart thumping, and checked the back seat. Empty. No card, no trace of him in my car. My passenger door was closed, seatbelt untouched. I filled my tank, bought a soda, and dared to look at my phone. No missed calls, no messages except a low battery warning. No photos in the gallery, no record of the GPS ping on the cutoff. The weather app said clear skies, no moons visible until after midnight. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, trying to piece it together. Silver dart, empty hillside, black SUV, card that said, "Watch the sky." Every stray beam of headlights against the treetops made me jerk the wheel. When I got home, I parked in the garage and sat for a long minute in the dark. I cracked the card between my fingers. The paper was smooth, pressed, and the ink was still cool to the touch. I set it on the kitchen counter under the overhead light and made coffee. Through the kitchen window, the asphalt of the driveway split into shadow and pool of yellow light. The sky over the ridge looked empty. I leaned my forehead against the glass and listened for engines or footsteps, anything to tell me he'd come back. Only the hum of the fridge and a distant bark from a neighbor's dog. I don't go that way anymore, not if I can avoid it. Last night I tried to look up the nearest alternate route on the GPS, but it kept rerouting me back to that cutoff. So I take the longer road, bumping through a few more miles of forest. Every so often I glance at the sky, half expecting to see that flash of silver, that fearful streak. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear gravel shifting behind me. just for a moment, like someone stepping out of the darkness and telling me to keep driving. I was untangling my line when I saw it, just below the surface, a shimmer. I'd launched the boat around 6 early May, water calm, no wind. I'd anchored off that old jetty about a quarter-mile from shore, hoping for some halibut. The sun was low and the sea looked glassy. I raised my polarized sunglasses and leaned over the side. There it was, a perfect disc, maybe 2 feet across, hovering 10 feet below me. It gleamed nickel-bright, edges blurred like light through water. I blinked, stared. My rod dipped in the holder and rattled with each small wave. I grabbed the camera, switched to dive mode, and took a shot through the green-blue blur. The disc was still there, not moving, not spinning, just hanging in place. No fish, no bubbles, no sign of a rope or weight holding it up. I leaned closer, breathing through the tube of my ragged hoodie, heart jumping. Then it vanished. No ripples, no sound, just water again. I sat back hard and tugged at the oars, had it sculling to shore. I didn't bother fishing that morning. The disc replayed in my head. Back home, I downloaded the photo. On the screen, there was a pale circle in the murk, grainy, underexposed, only the faintest outline. Everything else below the surface looked normal, seaweed drifting, sun rays cracking through. I stared until my coffee went cold. That afternoon, I told my neighbor, Jules, about it. She raised her eyebrows and said maybe I saw a sunken buoy or some diving gear. She's a marine biologist, so I expected more skepticism. We walked the jetty together at dusk. I asked her to look, but the water was dark by then. No disc, just the reflection of lights from the street lamps. Over the next 2 days, I kept peering out from my porch, scanning the bay. My dreams were full of metal shapes drifting in deep water. I woke at odd hours, thinking I heard something scrape the hull. On the third morning, 2 men showed up at my door around 8:15. I was in my bathrobe, clutching a mug. One was tall, thin, black fedora, black suit, shiny shoes, but with no tie. The other was shorter, stocky, and wore a black baseball cap, black jacket, black jeans. Both had pale faces and watched me with 2 steady eyes. I said, "Can I help you?" The tall one spoke. His voice was low, polite. "Are you Mr. Kendricks?" I nodded. "That's me." He tilted his head to the shorter man, who handed him a small folder, plain manila, no letterhead. The tall man opened it and showed me a couple of blurry prints, pale discs under dark water, the same exact shape I'd photographed. I recognized my photo, only grainier, smudged, like someone had run a brush over it. The tall man said, "These are from your camera, yes?" I felt a rush of heat. "Yeah, that was mine." He closed the folder. "Those images should be considered misfire errors, equipment glare, water droplets on the lens." He paused. "We suggest you remove them and not speak of the matter further." My mug trembled in my hand. I set it on the porch railing. "Why?" He watched me carefully. "No reason to make this public. It's best kept in your private records." I ran a hand through my wet hair. "You want me to delete the photos?" He nodded once. "Delete them. It will be on your conscience less." The stocky man leaned forward slightly. "Forget what you saw," he spoke softly but firm. I looked at them from head to toe. The taller one's fedora cast a perfect circle of shadow over his eyes. The shorter one's cap hid half his brow. They didn't blink. I said nothing. They closed the folder, handed it back, and turned toward the truck parked across the gravel drive. It was matte black, no markings. The tall man tipped his hat, said, "Thank you," and climbed in. The stocky one followed. The engine hummed briefly, then died. The cab door slammed, and they vanished down the road without headlights. I stared at the driveway for minutes, heart pounding so loud I thought it'd wake the whole neighborhood. Eventually, I went inside, locked the door, and flicked on every light. I grabbed my laptop and found the disk photo. I dragged it to the trash folder, hesitated, then hit delete. I clicked empty trash. Later that day, I tried to film off the jetty again. Same spot, same light, same calm water. Nothing shimmered beneath. Just the usual flats, seagrass, the lazy shadows of passing clouds. I lowered my camera, closed my eyes for a second, breathed in salt air, then had to fight the urge to check the horizon for a glint of metal. I haven't told anyone else. Not Jules. Not my wife. Not even the fishing forum. I keep replaying how the men in black looked at me, as if they were cataloging what I could remember. Maybe they're right, and it was a camera glitch or a trick of water. But sometimes late at night, I dream of that perfect circle hovering in the sea, and I wake up reaching for the photos I trashed. I sleep with my windows shut tight now, and I drive past the old jetty on my way to work without slowing down. The bay looks normal, empty, like nothing ever happened. I wonder if I imagine it all, or if something down there waits for me to look again. I rolled up to the corner of 5th and Madison just after midnight, idling under the streetlight. Rain from earlier had slicked the pavement and steam curled off manhole covers. My name's Derek Chavez. I drive a cab for Eastside Taxis, and I was wrapping up what I thought would be my last shift before the weekend. A black sedan pulled in behind me, door opened, and 2 men in dark suits climbed into the back seat without a word. They shut the door so quietly I hardly heard the click. I glanced in the rear view. Both wore white shirts, skinny black ties, polished shoes, and sunglasses, even in the wet dark. One was tall and lean, the other shorter and square-shouldered. Neither gave me a destination. I tapped the meter and said, "Where to, gentlemen?" The tall one leaned forward, voice calm, no accent I could place. "No destination," he said. "Just drive." I nodded, leaned back. "Anything come up on the meter?" "Drive," was all he said. I pulled away and took Madison north toward the freeway. After a minute, I glanced at the fare display, $4.20 and climbing. I checked the rear view. No expression, no phone, just 2 dark shapes in black suits. I asked, "Roundabout on Maple?" The short one turned his head slightly and said, "Circle the city, follow directions." Directions? He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small slip of paper, and handed it to me blind. No writing facing me, just tiny water spots from the cab's humidity. I folded it into the console. I tried to read it, but couldn't make out letters in the low light. "Okay," I said. "Maple roundabout, then what?" He didn't answer. The tall one cleared his throat, tapped the back of my seat. His jacket shifted, revealing a silver clip, no gun handle, just a metal rectangle. "Begin." I took the first exit off the freeway onto Maple, looped the circle, then followed the on-ramp back. Lights of downtown shimmered ahead. I glanced at the slip. 3 simple arrows, left, right, left, and no street names. I followed them, drifting past quiet neighborhoods, neon signs, shuttered storefronts. The meter climbed past $50, then $70. My head throbbed. I checked my watch, 2:15 a.m., but I'd thought it was only 12:30. "Rough ride?" I said. Neither man reacted. The short one said, "Keep driving." I pressed the radio. Static. I tried the city channel. Nothing but hiss. Cell service was spotty, so I dropped the window a crack and listened for engines or sirens. Just distant hum, occasional car. I felt like I was the only person awake. At 3:07, I pulled onto a one-way street and followed the arrows back over the river up into the industrial district. Street lamps flickered orange. The slip had another arrow pointing back downtown. I swallowed and punched the gas. The city skyline drifted past, neon signs reflecting on wet asphalt. By 4 a.m., I was somewhere near the old freight yard. Rails rusty, warehouses dark. I looped a block lined with chain link fences. The meter read $142.50. My hands trembled on the wheel. I wanted to ask who was paying for this, but the air in the cab felt heavy, like a weight on my chest. At 4:22, I rounded a corner and saw a lone street lamp illuminating a crumpled slip of paper taped to a stop sign. I slowed. The shorter man leaned forward, pointed without moving his fingers. I braked. Under the lamp, the paper read, "Exit here." I followed an alley under a broken chain, past a shuttered auto shop, and came out on the bridge. I stopped when the arrow pointed straight ahead. The tall one reached out and opened the door himself, stepping onto the slick sidewalk without glancing back. The short one followed. I watched them walk into a bus shelter painted bright yellow, then merge into the night. I sat for 30 seconds, heart pounding. Then I opened the door, stepped out, and closed it gently. I picked up the paper slip from the console. It was blank, no ink, no letters. I checked the fare. It flashed fare courtesy of Agent S. Then the display reset to 0. My head spun. I closed the meter, locked the doors, and sat in the cab sipping lukewarm coffee. I checked my phone, 2 missed calls from dispatch, 1 voicemail. "Where are you, Chavez? Been driving in circles for hours. Report in." I bit my lip and hit call back. The line connected to an unknown number. No ring, just a click. Then a voice, low and calm, female, never mentioned last night's ride. I stuttered, "Who is this?" No answer, just silence. Then the line went dead. I sat in the empty cab for a long time, rain starting again, drumming on the roof. I finally got out, locked the doors, and walked under the bridge to the bus stop. My headlamp from the glove box flickered to life in my hand. The yellow shelter was empty. I saw no suits, no footprints in the puddles. I walked home through dark back streets and got inside my apartment at 5:03 a.m. I left the meter card in my pocket. It showed 0 charge. My phone no longer had the unknown number in the call log. I put on the kettle, stared at the rain-smeared window until dawn. When I left 2 hours later for my day job, I locked my front door and made sure nobody followed. I didn't mention it to dispatch. I don't know who paid for the ride or why they put me through all those loops. The slip of paper in my pocket is still blank, but I carry it anyway. Sometimes when the light hits it just right, I swear I see faint outlines of arrows. I usually tuck it back into my wallet and keep walking, hoping I never get that call again. I saw the scorch mark first thing at sunrise. I was driving the crew truck down County Road 42, heading to the site just north of Willow Creek, when the headlights caught it. A dark circle, almost perfect, about 2 feet across, right in the center of the right lane. The pavement around it was normal asphalt. This spot looked baked, like someone had held a blowtorch on it until the surface bubbled. No cracks, no debris, just a round, hard-edged patch of charcoal. I parked between the cones, grabbed my hard hat and flashlight, and crossed the road. The air smelled funny, like burning rubber mixed with ozone. I crouched, shined the light. The circle was smooth, almost glassy, reflecting the beam. I ran a gloved finger along the edge. Sharp. No chips. I tapped the center, hollow sound like hitting a lid. I shivered, thinking of what could have done this. I clipped my radio mic. "Base to crew, come in. I've got something odd on County 42, mile 5.7. No response. Everyone was already out marking potholes on Route 99. I picked up a rock, flicked at the circle's edge. No mark. I dropped it and pounded my fist on the pavement. It didn't dent. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo. Autofocus struggled. The image was grainy, a perfect black ring in gray pavement. I stood and checked my watch. 6:12 a.m. The sun was orange behind the cottonwoods. I called dispatch, but they said crews were still mobilizing and wouldn't reach me for another hour. I shrugged, climbed back in the truck, and drove south to grab coffee. The road was empty, 2-lane ribbon through farmland, corn stalks bent in a light breeze. I felt like someone watched me from the fields. At the diner in Ibis, I ordered black coffee and a sausage biscuit. I told the waitress, Maria, about the mark. She frowned and said her brother said he saw something in a crop circle out by Tiller's Mill last night. Said it glowed blue then faded. I frowned. Different shapes, but same idea. Perfect geometry, no explanation. Back at the site around 7:30, the crew finally showed. Ahmed and Lena, armed with shovels and metal detectors. I led them across the cones. Ahmed knelt and ran his detector over the ring. No beep. Lena scraped at the edge with a trowel. Dust came away. No metal fragments. We dug a foot down, solid earth. No hidden device. The circle stayed glued to the asphalt. We logged it as unidentified pavement anomaly, and I marked the corners with spray paint. Red, yellow, red, yellow. Everything felt off. At 8:45, I took the truck for water and cigarettes, stood in the shade of a power pole, smoking, looking at the burn mark. In the sky, a single helicopter swept the county line. No banner, just a search pattern. It passed north to south 3 times, rotor noise distant. I wondered if it saw the circle too. I called up on the radio, "Base, is anyone flying recon?" No answer. By mid-morning, the county rep arrived, sharp suit, gray hair, sunglasses despite the overcast. He pulled into the site in a black sedan, engine off. I walked over. "Morning," I said. "You the one who called this in?" He didn't smile. He flipped a badge, no logo, just C. Langford, Special Investigator. He set it down and leaned on the hood. "You found the pavement mark?" I gestured. "Yeah, I'm Sam Nguyen, County Highway District 7. That's it right there." I pointed at the circle. "No idea what made it. We dug down, nothing." He nodded once. "Interesting." He pulled a small booklet from his jacket and scribbled a note. "Any unusual readings?" He tapped the notebook. "Radiation? Heat anomalies?" Nope, I said. Thermal camera was normal, no Geiger response, just looks burned. Smells weird. No tracks or anything. He looked at the ground, squatted, and ran a gloved hand over the surface, careful not to touch the center. Then he stood and snapped the notebook shut. We'll need to keep this off the record. He looked me in the eye. No reports, no photos beyond initial intake. I felt a pinch in my gut. You want me to delete the pictures? He tapped the sunglasses. Just hold them. If anyone asks, you never found anything. You patched it and moved on. I shook my head. I can't do that. County policy. Any safety hazard gets logged. He straightened and brushed dust off his suit. This isn't policy. It's an order. He paused. You'll understand later. He reached into his coat, pulled a card, slid it across the hood. Here's my contact. If anyone asks about District 7 anomalies, you tell them you referred it to me. He tapped the card again. Capiche? I looked at the card. No agency name, just a phone number and a name. C. Langford. No title, no logo. I slid it to my jacket pocket. He nodded, got into the black sedan, and left without looking back. I stood by the circle. Crickets sounded in the grass, distant engines on the highway. Lena and Ahmed watched from the cab, brows furrowed. I waved them over and told them to cover the hole with cold mix, smooth it out, no mention of the circle. Ahmed hesitated, but I shook my head. Company policy. If the boss says cover it, cover it. We troweled black asphalt over the mark until it blended with the pavement. I ran the roller over it twice, then packed up. On the drive home, the county card burned a hole in my pocket. I stared at the number. Outside Ibis, I saw the helicopter again. Same pattern. It passed overhead, rotor blades slicing gray sky into shadow. I felt fingers of dread trace my spine. I got home around noon, rain starting, dripping off my jacket. I threw my keys on the table, stripped off work boots, showered. In the bathroom mirror, I looked tired, dark circles, pale skin. I dried off, dressed, then sat at the kitchen table with my phone. I stared at the card. C. Langford, special investigator, so special no one else knows him. I considered calling the number, but my finger hovered. I poured coffee, black, like this morning. I ate a cold sausage biscuit left on the counter. Outside, the rain picked up, tapping the window in sync with my pulse. I heard a car pull into the drive. My neighbor, Miss Carter. She knocked. I opened the door. She was soaked. She asked about the highway crew. I said we had a routine patch. She nodded and said her son saw strange lights on the road at dawn, like glowing cracks, then nothing. I forced a laugh and said it must have been reflections. She smiled, thanked me, and left. I closed the door, heart thumping. My eyes found the cold mix patch in the driveway, just a dark rectangle on cracked asphalt. I ran my hand over the sheet of metal I keep for repairs, then set the manila card next to it on the table. The rain drummed. Strange shapes in the wet on the windowsill, flickering neon across the yard. I sipped my coffee and stared at the card until the mug went cold. I didn't call Langford. I didn't delete the photos yet. I just sat there listening to the rain, feeling watched by the pavement itself. I was working as a park ranger at Cedar Hollow State Park that summer. It's a pretty quiet place, mostly just hikers and families during the day, and by night, well, it's mostly me and the wildlife. The park is thick with pine and oak, and there's this one area near the north end, past the old fire road, that I like to check every few days. Not for anything special, just routine patrol stuff. One afternoon, about a week before the end of July, I was driving down that fire road, just doing a slow loop on my ATV when I noticed something that didn't sit right. Up ahead, there was a clear patch in the forest. What caught my eye was how perfect the circle was. I've been around long enough to know what natural clearings look like, and this wasn't it. This patch was about 40 feet across, and every single tree inside it was dead, brittle and gray, like they'd been scorched, but without any signs of burning on the ground. The grass in the circle was yellowed and dry too, like nothing could grow there. It was strange, especially because everything around it looked fine. The trees just outside that circle were healthy, green, no disease or bugs or anything. I parked the ATV nearby and got out to take a closer look. The air in that spot felt heavier, almost sticky. I crouched and poked the dead grass with a stick. It was brittle, snapped easily, and smelled faintly of something chemical, but I couldn't place what. I pulled out my radio and called the main office to report the patch. I was halfway through explaining when the radio buzzed weirdly, a crackle that lasted a few seconds, then went dead. I checked the battery and antenna, everything looked fine, but I couldn't get a signal. Odd, but I shrugged it off. Could have been the trees messing with the frequency. I decided to head back to the ranger station and log the finding there. It was late afternoon, around 5 p.m., and the sky was thick with clouds rolling in. A few drops of rain had started to fall as I made my way down the road. When I got back, the station was quiet except for the usual hum of the refrigerator and the old radio playing some country music low in the background. That evening, after dinner, I sat by the window in the common room, looking out toward the fire road. The sky had darkened, the rain stopped, but the clouds still hung low and heavy. It was just past 9 p.m. when I noticed headlights coming slowly down the road. 2 cars passed by the station, but one of them slowed and pulled off onto the side near the area where I'd found the dead trees. I grabbed my binoculars and watched. 2 men got out of a dark sedan. They were both dressed in black suits, neat and unwrinkled, even in the wet weather. No rain gear, just standing there quietly by the edge of the woods. They didn't look around much, just stood facing the dead patch, watching it. I was curious but also uneasy. I didn't recognize them. No badges, no radios, no gear like the usual forestry or park service people. Just black suits and a strange kind of stillness about them. I wanted to call them, ask what they were doing, but the radio was still dead. After about 20 minutes, they got back into their car. They didn't look at the station or me once. The car started up, backed slowly down the road, then disappeared into the dark. I waited a while, half expecting them to come back, but the road stayed empty the rest of the night. The next day, I went back to the patch. I was hoping it would have changed somehow or that maybe I'd missed something, but the circle was exactly the same. No new tracks, no signs of disturbance. I checked the soil carefully, but didn't find anything concrete. No burns, no chemicals I could identify. Just dead trees, perfectly contained. I mentioned the men to my supervisor, but he brushed it off. Said maybe it was some government forestry thing or a weather anomaly. I didn't push it. The radio started working again the following morning, but I kept an eye out for the men in black, just in case. They never came back. Still, every time I drove past that patch after dark, I had the feeling I was being watched, like something was waiting just beyond the tree line, quiet and patient. It's been months now. The dead trees are still there, and the circle hasn't changed. I can't explain what I saw or why those men were there. It's like the forest kept a secret, and they were the only ones who knew what it was. I heard the rumble before I saw the missile launch. It was just before dawn at the test range south of White Sands, and the sky was overcast. Thick gray clouds low enough to tint the rising sun. I'd driven out the night before, camped in my car by the observation bunker, waiting for the scheduled test. My name's Mara Jensen, freelance aerospace journalist, and I'd been chasing missile launches for 2 years. At 6:02 a.m., the alert horn sounded. I raised my DSLR to my eye and framed the pad through the bunker's slit window. There was a bright flash, then the missile's contrail cut through the clouds like a white ribbon. Jet noise filled the air, turning from a deep roar to a distant whine as it climbed out of sight. I snapped off a dozen shots, lowering the camera only when the sound faded. That's when I saw it, a lone figure backlit by floodlights near the service road. It stood by the chain link fence, shoulders squared at attention, head tilted slightly forward. No safety vest, no helmet, just a dark suit, stark against the gray morning. I raised the lens and zoomed in. The figure didn't move. I ducked under the window and headed out the door, camera in hand. By the time I reached the fence, the test crew had pulled back to their vehicles, and the road was empty except for the gravel and stray ribbons of parachute hardware. The figure should have been there, but it wasn't. I circled the perimeter, peered through glare tape, and checked every shadowy corner. Nothing. No footprints, no crushed grass, no trace of anyone standing there. My heart thumped. I tapped my radio. Range control, this is Jensen. Do you have an observer at the south fence? No answer. Radio silent. I started walking back to the bunker when I heard a soft click behind me. I spun. There, under the flood lamp, stood a man in a black suit. White shirt, narrow black tie, shoes polished too bright for gravel. His posture was too perfect, like someone dressed him. I swallowed. My feet felt glued to the ground. He raised a hand in a small wave. I said, "Excuse me, are you?" But he cut me off. "Ma'am." His voice was calm, clipped. "This area is off limits." I held up my press badge. "I'm with Defense Tech Weekly. I have permission for photos." He shook his head. "Permission revoked." He took a step closer. "Please return to the bunker." His face was pinched in that odd way. No expression, but not unfriendly. I glanced toward the clock on the bunker wall. 6:15. I'd spent 10 minutes looking for that first figure, but it felt longer. I said, "Sir, I saw someone here before. Dark suit standing at the fence. Did you see them?" My voice was half plea. He cocked his head. "No." He checked his watch. "Now please step away from the fence." I raised the camera. "Can I get a quote on why I'm being escorted?" I pressed record. He smiled once, a faint tilt of the mouth, and shook his head. "No, area is secured." He sighed like he hated doing this. "Are you going to comply?" My fingers hovered over the shutter. I didn't want to back down, but the hair on my arms prickled. I stepped away, lowering the camera. He nodded, turned, and strode off into the shadows behind the service road. His shoes didn't crunch, they glided. I watched until he disappeared. Then I walked back to the bunker, mind buzzing, camera dangling. The test crew was gone, all their vans pulled off the road. The bunker door was locked, no one inside. I waited until 7 a.m., then drove down to the main gate. The security guard looked at me like I was lost. I flashed my pass. He said, "Range closure? You must have missed the memo." I said there was no memo. He just shrugged and punched the gate code. "You shouldn't have been here," he said. Back on the highway, I checked the photos. The missile blasts were fine, bright arcs in the cloud cover, but every shot of the fence line had a dark blur in the corner, a shape like a standing figure, then gone. I zoomed in. The blur had edges like fabric, but no detail. Then it was gone in the next frame. I called my editor at 8:15. I tried to tell her about the man in black, about seeing him under the flood lamp, but my voice cracked. She said the range was tight with security for the new hypersonic tests, so they'd scrub photos if there was anything sensitive. I said, "What about the guy in the suit?" She told me to run the launch pics and file the rest under shelf stock. I sat at the diner half a mile off base, spooning coffee. My camera bag rested on the seat beside me. I stared at the windows, expecting to see him in black standing there, but nothing, just highway and scrub pines. I left my card with the waitress and walked to my car. In the passenger seat lay a sealed manila envelope, stamp date 6/12, no return address. Inside, 2 prints of my photos cropped close to the fence line and a single slip of paper, no further inquiry. I folded it, tucked it back in the glove box, and drove home, feeling like I'd just woken from a half-remembered dream. The highway stretched on, yellow lines fading into dawn, and I kept thinking I'd see that dark figure in my rear view. Perfect posture, black suit, unblinking eyes. I didn't. I just kept driving until the city lights rose ahead. I was working the graveyard shift at the Green Ridge gas station. That little place just off Highway 89, the one that nobody really stops at unless they're passing through or desperate. It was just after midnight, early September, and the night had been slow. Cars trickling in and out every now and then, mostly truckers or folks heading home from late shifts. The kind of night where the fluorescent lights inside the station buzz just loud enough to remind you you're the only one awake. Around 12:45, a beat-up silver sedan rolled up to pump 3. The driver's window was down, and the inside light clicked on when the driver popped it open. I was stacking energy drinks by the cooler and glanced up just as the car door shut. In the rear-view mirror of the sedan, I saw something odd, a dark, round shape hovering low over the far side of the parking lot, near the trees lining the edge of the lot. It was about the size of a small car, but the edges were fuzzy, like it was shimmering or out of focus. It wasn't making any noise, and there were no lights on it, just this weird, flat disc shape, kind of floating a foot above the ground. I blinked and looked back out toward where I'd seen it. The car was still there, engine idling, but the driver's seat was empty. I rubbed my eyes. I thought maybe the driver stepped out for a smoke or something. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" Nothing. No answer. I walked around to the passenger side and looked inside. No one. The door was locked. I circled the car once, scanning the lot and trees. Nothing. No sign of anyone nearby. The weird disc thing was gone too. I double-checked the rearview mirror. The spot was empty. I stood there for a minute, feeling that hollow kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I went back inside, locked the door behind me, and grabbed the store phone to call the local sheriff. The line was dead. I tried the radio, same deal. The place was a dead zone for calls most nights, but I usually had enough signal for a quick text. Nothing. I turned around, glanced back outside, and the sedan was gone. No headlights, no taillights, just nothing. About 10 minutes later, the bell above the door jingled. I looked up. A man was standing there, wearing a dark suit and tie despite the warm September night. His hair was perfectly slicked back, and he had this pale, expressionless face that didn't quite fit with the tired, dusty gas station. He looked like he walked straight out of an old black and white movie. "Good evening," he said in a calm, flat voice. "I'm sorry to bother you. I just have a couple of questions." I nodded, still a little shaken. "Yeah? What about? Have you noticed anything strange lately? Anything unusual around here? Lights, sounds, things out of place?" I swallowed. I don't know. A car just stopped a bit ago, but when I looked, the driver was gone, and I thought I saw something weird in the parking lot." He didn't react like I expected. No surprise, no curiosity, just calm and collected. "Can you describe it?" I told him about the disc-like shape hovering near the trees. No lights, no noise, like it was shimmering. He nodded slowly, like he was filing the info away. "Did you take any pictures?" I shook my head. No, I was too confused to think of it. He pulled out a small notebook, flipped it open, and made a quick note. "It's best you keep this to yourself. People tend to misunderstand things they don't see often." I frowned. "You mean like the sheriff?" He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Exactly." He glanced around the store, then back at me. "If anyone asks, you didn't see anything unusual tonight. Understand?" I hesitated. "I guess." My gut was screaming at me to call someone, to get out of there, but the words stuck in my throat. He closed the notebook, tucked it into his coat, and walked toward the door. Before he left, he turned back and said, "We're watching, but we don't want to interfere unless necessary." Then, he was gone. I sat behind the counter for the next hour, heart pounding, eyes flicking to the windows every few seconds. The night stayed quiet, too quiet. When the morning shift finally showed up, I handed over my keys without a word. I didn't want to say anything and have it sound crazy. For the next few days, I kept checking the parking lot. No strange cars, no hovering discs. But sometimes, when it was dark, I'd catch a flash of something in the rearview mirror, just at the edge of the lot near the trees. Always gone when I looked directly. I didn't tell anyone else. It felt like one of those things you just don't talk about, especially after a man in a suit tells you to keep quiet. The weird part is I'm still not sure if I saw what I think I saw. Maybe the driver was playing a prank, but that didn't explain the empty car or the shape in the mirror, or the silence that followed. Sometimes I wonder if they're still watching. I hit the trail at 3 in the afternoon, sun beating down on the high desert outside Cedar Flats. My name's Alex Morales, and I'd come out to clear my head. No cell signal, just the old missile silo they decommissioned in the 70s, sitting halfway up the slope of Bald Mountain. The trail was dusty and overgrown, but I'd printed a topo map the night before, so I figured I'd find it easy enough. By 4:30, I'd topped out at the crater's rim. The silo hulked there, half-buried, concrete walls cracked and stained. I dropped my pack and walked around the perimeter, eyes wide for snakes. Instead, I saw patches of metal jutting from the rubble, steel panels, rusted bolts, sections of corrugated plating. I pulled out my camera to snap pictures of the peeling chrome finish. That's when I noticed the reflections. I looked at one panel and saw, not my camera, but a flash of movement behind me. Something bright, almost white, sliding across the metal like liquid. I spun around. Nothing. Just the sky, heat waves dancing over scrub brush. I looked back at the panel. The glint was gone, replaced by dull rust. I crouched and shined my flashlight on the surface. Scratches, dents, but no new mark. My breath stuck in my throat. The angle of the metal couldn't catch the sun that way. I set the flashlight aside and circled the silo, peering into every recess. Between two wall segments was a narrow gap, wide enough to squeeze into. I got on my belly and pushed my pack through, then wriggled in. Inside was hollow, old cables draped like dead vines, puddles of murky water at my feet. I shone the beam across the floor and saw ice blue reflections on the far wall. Brief pinpricks of light, 10 or 15 of them, like someone had shaken a handful of flashlights behind the concrete ribs. I raised the beam higher. Nothing but rough surfaces. I swung left, then right. The reflections were gone. My heart pounded. I sat up and felt the walls chill against my fingertips. The hole I'd crawled through was smooth, almost polished, not chipped. I shivered and climbed back out, brush catching my shirt. The sun was lower now. I set up camp at the ridge's edge, tent, sleeping bag, stove. I made ramen and stared back at the silo, half expecting those reflections to return. But the metal was a fading copper in the sunset, no shine, no flash. I brushed it off as a trick of light and rolled into my bag at dusk. Sometime around midnight, I woke to a low hum. Not like an engine, more like air through a vent. I sat up, heart thudding. The desert was silent, save for crickets in the scrub. I crawled out of the tent and scanned the sky for stars. None moved. I flicked on my headlamp and pointed it back at the silo. The mouth of the crater was dark, but the dome at the top, where a vent cap used to be, glowed faintly, pale green, then winked out. I rubbed my eyes, but when I looked again, nothing. I went back to the tent and lay awake until dawn, listening for that hum, feeling like someone watched from just beyond my sight. At sunrise, I packed up and followed the trail down toward Elk Ridge Ranger Station, about 6 miles below. My legs ached, but I kept going, replaying the reflections in my mind. By the time I got there, I was dusty and dehydrated, but I managed to check in and sign out mentally. Behind the wooden desk sat Ranger Connolly, a woman in her 60s with a sun-wrinkled face. She nodded when I said I was heading back to town. I told her about my hike. "Nice spot," she said, and I asked if anyone else had reported odd lights by the silo. She tilted her head as if testing my tone and said she hadn't heard anything. I shrugged and said maybe I was seeing things. That's when the door chimed behind us. I glanced up. A man in a charcoal gray suit stood just inside the threshold. No ranger patch, no badge, just a pressed jacket and polished shoes. He held a white envelope, sealed with red wax, stamped with a single letter R. Ranger Connolly perked up. He walked behind the desk and set the envelope next to her clipboard. She lifted an eyebrow and slid it across the counter. "Return to sender," he said, voice low and smooth. I believe this was misplaced. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at her, just watched the envelope, folded and waiting. She picked it up, weighed it in her hand. "We don't have a mail drop here," he said. "Then I'm the mailman." He straightened. "I trust you'll handle it accordingly." I felt my throat tighten. I said, "I didn't leave anything here." My voice sounded small. He turned toward me for the first time. His face was calm, almost blank, eyes dark behind thin-rimmed glasses. "Of course." He took a step back. "Good day." Then he walked out the door without another sound. Ranger Connolly stared after him, then tucked the envelope into her filing cabinet. "He's new," she said finally, as if she could still taste the formality. She waved at me. "Drive safe, Alex." I nodded and walked out, feeling the envelope's empty weight in my mind. I headed down the dirt road, uncertain why I felt watched by every shadow in the trees. The sky overhead was brightening with morning light, but I felt like noon would still be dusk. I reached my car, windows fogged with dust, and sat for a moment. Then I drove away, replaying the seams of the bunker, the ice blue flashes, the glow at midnight, and that suited man slipping an envelope through a locked door. I passed the turnoff to Bald Mountain without a look back, headlights on low beam, waiting for someone, something, to light the horizon again. I was parked at the overlook above Seal Cove, down near Mendocino. It was a Sunday evening, end of July, and the air still had some weight to it from the heat. I'd gone up there to catch the last of the light and maybe mess around with my binoculars. Not for anything serious, just something I do sometimes. I like the ocean at dusk. Everything feels quieter out there. The lot was mostly empty. One other car, some kind of camper van, parked further down, but no movement. I had a thermos of tea and my small binoculars. Nothing high-tech. I wasn't expecting to see anything unusual. It started with a shimmer. Not flashing or moving, just a shimmer. Like heat rising off pavement, except it was hovering out over the water. Low, maybe a couple degrees above the horizon. I almost missed it because it blended right into the haze. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe something from a fishing boat way out. But when I focused in, it didn't look like any light I'd seen. It didn't flicker, it pulsed, steady, rhythm-like. The shape kept shifting, not spinning, but folding into itself, then stretching out, then folding again, like a bubble made of something denser than air. I watched it for a few minutes, no movement. It stayed locked in place, same shimmer, same dull pulsing. The ocean underneath it looked untouched. No waves, no current. Like that patch of water wasn't part of the ocean anymore. Then something passed in front of it. That's what made me freeze. It wasn't a bird or a plane. It was darker than the sky, but had no edges. It drifted across that shimmer and was gone just as fast. I didn't catch a shape, just a sense of depth, like something big had blocked it for a second. I scanned around for a boat, maybe something with a spotlight, but the water was empty. Right about then, my binoculars stopped working. Not in a mechanical way, they were fine the next morning, but in that moment, it was like they wouldn't focus anymore. I could see the railing near the bluff, I could see my hands, but every time I turned them toward the shimmer, it just blurred out completely. I set them down and looked with my eyes again. The shimmer was still there, but fainter now, almost like it had moved further out. I stayed parked maybe 10 more minutes. I didn't see anything else. The light was dropping off fast, and the air had that heavy silence right before it gets fully dark. I put the binoculars back in their case and was just sitting there with the window down when someone tapped on the glass. I jumped. It was a man. Black suit, clean white shirt, no tie. Late 40s, I'd guess. Tall, pale, no visible expression. I hadn't heard a car pull in. I hadn't seen anyone walk up. 1 second I was alone. The next, he was right there next to my window. I rolled it down halfway. He leaned in slightly. Not enough to be threatening, just enough that I could see his eyes. He said, "That part of the sky isn't public." Just like that. His voice was smooth but flat. Not unfriendly, but not right either, like someone reading lines in a language they didn't grow up speaking. I asked him what he meant. I remember I tried to keep my tone casual, but I could feel my hands shaking a little on the wheel. He didn't repeat it. He just said, "Please don't use optical devices in restricted airspace," and then straightened up. I looked past him, expecting to see a vehicle, maybe parked behind me. There was nothing. The camper van from earlier was gone. The whole lot was empty, and I hadn't seen it leave. I glanced back. He was walking away, heading toward the path that leads down to the beach, but he didn't follow it. He went past it, toward the edge where the bluff starts to drop. No flashlight, no hesitation. Just kept walking until he was out of view. I waited. I don't know why. I think part of me was expecting him to come back or say something else, but the path stayed quiet. Eventually I drove home. Didn't even turn on the radio. When I got back to my apartment, I pulled the binoculars out and tested them again. They were fine, crystal clear. I pointed them at some street signs down the block, and everything came into focus, no problem. The next day, I drove back out there around the same time. Parked in the same spot, nothing in the sky, same ocean, same breeze. I stayed for about an hour, no shimmer, no man, no van. But there was a new sign posted near the rail, small metal bolted into the wood. It said, "Sensitive marine surveillance area, do not loiter." I don't remember that being there the night before. I was down at Sunset Point, just west of San Luis Obispo. It's not really a beach, more like a gravel turnout with a clear view of the ocean. Locals know it, but it's not marked on most maps. I used to drive out there sometimes after work, quiet place to sit with a drink and clear my head. That night, it was warm. Sky was hazy, but not fully overcast. Just that strange light you get at the tail end of a hot day where the sun's gone, but everything still glows a little. I had my binoculars with me, a pair of Nikons my dad gave me years ago. I'd keep them in the glove box. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I just finished my sandwich and leaned forward over the steering wheel to scan the water. There was a tanker ship in the distance, a few gulls flying low. Then something shimmered on the horizon, almost directly west. It didn't move at first, just a little patch above the water, a couple degrees off the surface. Looked like a heat mirage, except the air wasn't hot anymore, and the ocean doesn't do that. It had a shimmer, yeah, but there was a texture to it, like cellophane being stretched, almost cube-shaped with the top edge sort of flickering in and out. I held the binoculars steady. The shape wasn't sharp, it was like my eyes wanted to slide off it. The edges bent slightly as I watched, not just shimmering, but flexing. There was no sound, no lights, just this wrong-looking patch in the air. The water under it looked darker than the rest. I looked away for a second, wiped the lenses, looked again. Still there. I don't know how long I stared at it. Long enough that the light changed. The sun had completely dropped by then, but the shimmer still held some weird internal glow. Not bright, just visible enough to know it hadn't gone. I was about to take a picture with my phone, but I hesitated. I couldn't explain why. Something about it made me feel like I wasn't supposed to, like photographing it would change something. About a minute later, I noticed headlights in my rear view. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People pulled into that lot sometimes to smoke or take photos. But this car, a black sedan, pulled in fast, like they knew exactly where they were going. No hesitation. They stopped maybe 5 feet behind my bumper. No lights inside. Couldn't see anyone through the windshield. I lowered the binoculars. Tried not to look like I was rattled. The driver didn't get out right away. The car just sat there, engine idling low. After maybe 30 seconds, both front doors opened at the same time. 2 men got out, both in black suits. No jackets, just crisp white shirts and narrow black ties. Hair neat, no facial expressions. They walked straight toward my window like they'd done it 100 times. The one on the driver's side tapped lightly on my window. I rolled it halfway down. He didn't smile, didn't introduce himself. He said, "That part of the sky isn't public." His voice was flat, almost monotone, but not robotic, just detached. I looked at him and said, "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. The other guy was standing a few feet behind him, arms at his sides, watching the road. Not me. Not the ocean. Just the road, like he was waiting for a car that wasn't coming. The man at my window pulled a folder from under his arm. Thin, manila, nothing written on the outside. He held it up just long enough for me to see the label on the front in bold black type. It said, "Natural phenomena restricted." Then he tucked it back under his arm without opening it. I asked again, "What does that mean?" He said, "We'd like you to leave now." I didn't argue. I didn't say anything. Just nodded and started the ignition. The man stepped back without another word. I pulled out of the lot, slow and steady. The sedan didn't follow me. I checked my mirrors for the next 10 miles. When I got home, I wrote down what I'd seen. Drew a quick sketch of the shimmer, just to remind myself. I tried to look up anything I could. Military zones, weather balloons, optical illusions, nothing matched. The next evening, I went back. Same time, same spot. I parked a little further down the lot and sat with the binoculars in my lap. The sky was clear, and the ocean looked normal. No shimmer. But there was a sign bolted into the railing near where I'd been parked the night before. Looked brand new. Plain metal, black print. It said, "Unauthorized observation prohibited. No photography or optical equipment beyond this point." I checked again 2 days later. The sign was gone. I was working night patrol on Highway 24, out near the Book Cliffs in eastern Utah. Pretty dead stretch most nights. Long runs between towns, barely any exits, just open desert and red rock. It was early April, windy but clear, and I'd been parked at one of those gravel pull-offs around mile marker 219, just killing time and watching for speeders, which honestly was rare past midnight. It was just after 2 a.m. I remember that because I looked at the clock, thinking I might finally grab a sandwich from the cooler. That's when I saw it, something hovering up near the ridge to the north. Not flying like a plane or moving like a drone, just hanging there. It looked like a box, a perfect black cube, maybe the size of a small car. No lights, no reflection. It didn't wobble or rotate, just sat there maybe 40, 50 feet off the ground above the ridgeline. At first, I thought it had to be some weird perspective thing, like maybe it was a tower or a boulder catching weird light. But there was no moon, and the stars behind it were gone. It blocked them completely. I got out of the cruiser and stood by the door. The wind was sharp, and the only sound was the occasional gust over the hood. I stood there staring at this thing, trying to make sense of it. My first instinct was to call it in, but I hesitated. What would I say? Floating cube, not doing anything? Then it moved, smoothly, sideways, not fast, maybe like 5 or 6 miles per hour, straight to the left, keeping the same altitude. Still, no lights, no sound, just this dark box sliding along the ridgeline. It covered about 100 yards and then stopped again, like it was observing something. I finally picked up the radio. I said I had an aerial object, unknown type, possibly a drone, hovering near mile marker 219. Dispatch asked if I wanted them to contact air support, but I told them to stand by. I wasn't sure it was worth escalating. It wasn't breaking any laws, technically, just existing. I got back in the car and kept eyes on it through the windshield. I watched it for maybe 5 more minutes. Then it started ascending, slowly, straight up. It went higher and higher until I couldn't see it anymore. No blinking lights, no trail, just gone. That's when the headlights showed up behind me. I hadn't heard an engine, I hadn't seen the approach in my mirrors. 1 second the road was empty. The next, a black sedan was idling behind my cruiser, maybe 10 feet back. No tags, no department markings. Windows completely blacked out. I stepped out again and started walking toward them, hand resting on my sidearm, but not drawn. My flashlight was already on. I shined it toward the windshield, but it reflected clean off the glass. Couldn't see anything inside. 2 men got out. Identical black suits, white shirts, black ties. They looked off. Their posture was too straight, too synchronized. One was taller, maybe 6'2", the other shorter, stockier. They didn't look like agents. More like mannequins dressed as agents. Neither one spoke. The tall one walked up to me. No badge, no ID. Just held out a manila folder with a red stamp on the corner that said natural phenomena, all caps. The folder was too clean, like it had just come off a printer. He handed it to me without saying a word and stepped back. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet. No letterhead, no official seal. Just a list of numbered bullet points. 1. Object observed between 1 and 3 a.m. 2. Do not engage or pursue. 3. No further documentation required. 4. No photographs. 5. Do not discuss with media or outside agencies. There was a small box at the bottom labeled Initial Confirmed with a blank line next to it. I looked up and the stockier guy was holding out a pen. I didn't sign it. I asked them who they were with. Neither of them answered. The tall one just looked at me and said, "The object is not your concern." His voice was even, no emotion, but something about it made my stomach turn. Not the words themselves, how they were delivered. Like, English wasn't his first language, but he had memorized the sentence perfectly. I handed the folder back and told them I needed identification if they were going to give me directives. The tall one smiled barely, not like he was amused, more like he was mimicking what he thought a smile was supposed to look like. The shorter man looked past me toward the ridge and said, "You didn't see where it went." I said, "I didn't follow." He repeated it, same tone, "You didn't see where it went." They got back in the car. No engine noise, no lights. The sedan rolled backward, made a perfect 3-point turn, and drove off into the dark without headlights. It didn't accelerate fast, just glided down the highway like it knew the road better than I did. I got back in my cruiser. Checked the dash cam. It was recording, but the playback showed nothing but black where the cube had been. No outline, no distortion, just clean sky. The sedan didn't show up on the camera at all. You could see my door open, and you could see me get out talking to someone off screen, but there was no vehicle behind me. Nothing. I stayed parked there another hour, trying to decide whether to report the full story. In the end, I just logged it as an unidentified aerial object, no interaction, no pursuit. That was 6 weeks ago. I haven't seen the cube again. But twice since then, I've noticed the same sedan parked off the road near my shift change point. Same model, same dark glass. Never moving. Never there when I come back through. I didn't sign the form, but they act like I did. I was working as a conductor for the Northwestern Rail Line, running the route that cuts through the Cascades. It's a long haul, mostly quiet stretches of forest and mountains and a few little towns. Most days were just routine, checking tickets, announcing stops, making sure everything ran on time. But one night, something happened on a stretch near Elk Ridge station that I've never been able to explain. It was late October, just after 9 p.m., and the sky was mostly clear, like a bit chilly, but not freezing. The train was headed north, and the moon was low and pale, casting long shadows over the dark trees lining the tracks. I was in the conductor's cabin near the front, sitting by the side window, sipping lukewarm coffee from my thermos. I'd been awake for a while, and the slow rhythm of the train made it easy to zone out. We passed through a remote section where the track cuts through dense forest with no roads or trails nearby. The trees there are tall and thick, and you can't see much beyond them. It's the kind of place where, if something strange happens, no one's around to see it. I'd passed this stretch dozens of times, never anything out of the ordinary. But that night, as we rounded a slight bend near milepost 42, I noticed something odd. A pale beam of light swept slowly across the trees on the right side of the track. It wasn't like a car's headlights or a flashlight. This was softer, almost ghostly, like someone was shining a searchlight through fog, except there was no fog. The beam moved in a smooth, steady arc, cutting through the darkness with a muted glow that didn't reflect off the trees like normal light would. At first, I thought maybe it was some maintenance crew or a drone, but there was no sound. The train's steady clatter was the only thing I heard. No hum, no buzz, no voices. The beam just swept back and forth, slow and deliberate, almost like it was scanning the forest. I leaned closer to the window, trying to see if there was anyone or anything at the source of the light. The trees blocked most of the view, but I caught a glimpse of a shadowy shape near the edge of the clearing. Too tall to be a person, maybe. I blinked a few times, thinking it was a trick of the eyes, but the light continued moving in that slow arc, unwavering. I tapped the radio to check in with the dispatcher, but there was no reply. Just static. The train rolled on, and the light beam disappeared behind the ridge, but the feeling didn't leave me. It was like someone, or something, was watching the tracks. When we pulled into Elk Ridge Station about 20 minutes later, the platform was empty, which wasn't unusual for that time of night. I was already preparing to make the quick stop and move on when two men appeared out of nowhere near the far end of the platform. They looked out of place, both wearing black suits and ties, perfectly pressed despite the damp chill in the air. No coats, no hats. They didn't carry bags or anything, just stood there staring at the train. They didn't look like travelers. No backpacks, no luggage. They didn't even seem cold, which was weird given how still and quiet the station was. I watched as they walked slowly toward the last car and climbed aboard without showing tickets or talking to anyone. The train was supposed to be closed to boarding at Elk Ridge this late, so this caught my attention. I considered calling the conductor on the radio, but the dispatcher was still silent. I checked my watch. We had about 40 minutes before the next scheduled stop. As the train started moving again, I noticed the two men sitting side by side near the back of the last car. They didn't speak or interact with other passengers. In fact, the other few people in that car seemed to ignore them completely, like they weren't really there. I kept an eye on them, but they never looked my way. No blinking, no shifting. Just sitting, staring straight ahead. At the next stop, Firgrove, a bigger town, I grabbed my ticket puncher and walked to the rear car. When I approached, the two men were gone. No sign of them anywhere on the platform or in the station. I asked the other passengers if they'd seen them get off, but nobody did. A couple people shrugged and said they hadn't noticed anyone new. I felt a strange weight in my chest, like I'd missed something important. I reported it to the station master, but he just gave me a knowing look and changed the subject. The rest of the trip was normal, but I kept thinking about the light beam and those two men. The following days, I asked around. Other conductors? No one reported anything similar. Dispatch? No explanation. Even the maintenance crews at Elk Ridge said they hadn't done any night work in weeks. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me that those men never spoke or showed ID. The way they appeared out of nowhere at the remote station, the silence on the radio, the strange light sweeping the forest, it didn't add up. I went back to Elk Ridge Station during the day. The platform looked normal. No signs of disturbance, no hidden cameras or strange equipment. I checked the official logs. No records of anyone boarding without tickets that night. Weeks later, I caught myself scanning the sky near Elk Ridge whenever I passed that stretch. No light beams, no men in suits. But sometimes when I'm alone in the conductor's cabin at night, I swear I can feel eyes watching from the woods, and the radio stays silent. I was camping alone up near Lawson in Northern California. Late September, before the first real snow, but cold enough at night to see your breath. I'd taken a few days off work, and instead of heading to the coast like I usually do, I just wanted quiet. I picked this old Forest Service site off a dirt road. Nothing official, no bathrooms or marked spaces, just a clearing big enough for my car and a two-person tent. I got there around 4 in the afternoon. Still light out, I set up camp, started a little fire, and cooked dinner. Just instant rice and beans on a camp stove. There was nobody else around. No tire tracks, no voices, no music. I didn't even have service once I turned off the highway. By 9, it was already dark. Really dark. No moon, no light pollution. I sat by the fire for a while, then crawled into the tent to read. I remember checking my phone, 9:42 p.m. I had it in airplane mode to save battery. I turned on my lantern, read a couple chapters of a mystery novel, then shut everything off. It was probably close to 11 when I laid down. I sleep light when I'm outside, but that night I must have gone under pretty hard. I didn't wake up until something lit up the tent. Not just a little, like with headlights or a flashlight, but fully lit. Like somebody flipped on a white floodlight right above me. The whole inside of the tent glowed. There was no sound. That's the part that bothered me. You'd expect to hear a car or even a drone, but it was dead silent. I sat up fast and grabbed my phone to check the time. 2:08 a.m. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The light wasn't coming from the ground. It was overhead. I leaned out farther, and that's when I saw them. 5 or 6 small white lights rotating in a tight circle, maybe 40 or 50 feet above the trees. Perfectly spaced, like they were attached to something, but I couldn't see any shape connecting them. Just the lights, slowly turning, no sound. I crouched there in the tent opening, staring up with my breath fogging. I don't know how long I watched. Long enough for my knees to go numb in the cold. The lights kept rotating, same direction, no change in speed. Then, without warning, they stopped. Held still for about 2 seconds, and then they blinked out. Not faded, just gone. The darkness was instant. My eyes took a second to adjust, and I stumbled back inside the tent, zipped it shut, and sat there for a while, just listening. Still nothing, not even wind. Eventually I laid back down, but I didn't really sleep. I stayed zipped in tight with my hat over my eyes and the sleeping bag pulled up to my chin. I kept waiting for a sound, a voice, anything. Nothing came. By sunrise, I was already packing up. I didn't even make coffee. Just folded the tent, tossed it in the back of the car, and got back on the forest road. The whole drive out, I kept checking the rearview mirror, even though there was no one behind me. About 40 minutes down the highway, I stopped at this roadside diner just outside a town called Mineral. I've passed it before, but never gone in. It's small. 2 booths, counter with stools, old linoleum floor. I figured I'd eat something real before heading home. There was only one other person there when I walked in. A man sitting at the counter with his back to me. The waitress waved and told me to sit wherever. I picked a booth by the window. I ordered eggs and toast. When she went back into the kitchen, the man at the counter stood up and turned around. He was tall, pale, clean-shaven, black suit. Not just black, sharp black. Like it didn't belong in that diner. No jacket, just the pants and a black button-up shirt, tucked in, sleeves perfectly straight. He had on a hat, dark gray or black, wide-brimmed, not a baseball cap or anything normal. Just old-looking. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, then walked over and slid into the booth across from me without asking. I didn't know what to do. I stared at him and waited for him to say something. He just sat with his hands folded on the table like he'd been planning to meet me there. Then he said, "Did you sleep through it?" His voice was calm. No real accent, but there was something strange about the way he spoke, like he was mimicking normal conversation but hadn't quite nailed the tone. I said, "Excuse me?" He didn't blink, just repeated it, slower. "Did you sleep through it?" I felt something tighten in my chest, like my body knew something I didn't. I said I didn't know what he meant. He tilted his head slightly, then looked out the window like he was bored or done with me. The waitress came back then with my food and stopped short. "Everything all right here?" she asked. I opened my mouth, ready to say something, anything, but the man stood up and walked out without a word. No coffee, no food, just left. I asked her if she knew him. She said she hadn't seen him come in. I ate quickly, barely tasted it. When I got outside, his car, or whatever he might have arrived in, wasn't there. Just my car and a rusty pickup truck around the side. The rest of the drive home, I kept trying to explain it away. Maybe I dozed off and dreamed the lights. Maybe the man was just a weirdo. But when I got home and looked at my phone, I found something I don't remember doing. In the Notes app, there was a new entry. Just a string of numbers, typed out at 2:17 a.m., a time when I was supposedly in my sleeping bag, not touching anything. There's no title, no formatting, just a line of numbers broken into sets of 3, like coordinates. I haven't looked them up. I don't want to know where they point. I was chasing storms in western Kansas, about 15 miles outside Scott City, late May of last year. I've been doing this for about 8 seasons now, mostly solo. Sometimes I team up with other chasers if I run into people I know out on the plains. That day, I was on my own. It was one of those textbook setups. Dry line pushing east, plenty of shear, cape values through the roof. The kind of sky that starts off all flat and blue and by late afternoon turns into something alive. I'd been watching a cell build for an hour or so, parked on a dirt road with a wide view of the horizon. Around 5:40 p.m., the storm really got its act together. Classics, supercell, big inflow tail, rotation tightening. I got into position east of the wall cloud, maybe 2.5 miles out. Lightning was constant by then, but no rain yet, so visibility was still decent. I was filming from the back of the truck with my main camera on the tripod and a GoPro suctioned to the dash, running a time lapse. At 6:12, the funnel dropped. Thin at first, like a rope, but it widened fast. Touched down in an open field and kicked up dirt immediately. I kept recording, repositioned once to stay ahead of it, and managed to capture a full 3 minutes of the tornado at peak strength. It was during those 3 minutes that I saw something I still can't explain. The tornado had started to wrap in rain, but I could still make out the base. There was a flash, bright but not lightning. It came from inside the funnel, not a reflection or debris. It was metallic and it moved against the rotation of the wind just for a split second. A disc shape, I think. But it was gone almost immediately, like it folded into the cloud and vanished. I replayed the footage in the truck right after and caught the flash on video. Frame by frame, it looked like something solid, smooth, slightly tilted, only visible for about 4 frames, so maybe a quarter of a second. There was no noise, no weird pressure shift, no electrical interference, just the thing. Whatever it was. I figured I'd dig into it back at the hotel. I was staying at a small place off US 83 in Oakley. Real basic, 1-story, concrete block rooms with rusted HVAC units and a lobby that smells like freezer burn. I'd stayed there before and the guy at the front desk remembered me. He gave me the same room I always get, second from the end. By the time I got back, it was after 9. The storm had moved on. I grabbed fast food, showered, and started transferring files to my laptop. That's when I noticed something weird. The GoPro footage didn't copy over. The file was there, but when I clicked it, it said unsupported format. I'd never seen that error before. I rebooted, tried different software, same thing. The file size looked right, timestamp matched, but it wouldn't open. The main camera footage worked fine. I isolated the clip with the flash and the tornado and exported a slowed down version. I zoomed in, enhanced the contrast, all that. Whatever the object was, it had mass. You could see the wind pushing around it, like the funnel bent slightly as it passed through. I've watched hundreds of tornado clips and I've never seen anything behave like that. I uploaded the clip to an external drive and unplugged everything for the night. I didn't post anything online yet. I figured I'd sit with it a bit. Around 1 to 10 a.m., there was a knock at my door. It wasn't loud, just two soft taps. Not the kind of knock you use when you need something. It sounded patient. I froze, looked through the peephole. Two men, maybe late 30s or 40s, both wearing black suits. No luggage, no phones in hand. One taller than the other. The tall one had a hat, like a fedora, but not stylized. Just plain. Both had pale skin and were completely still. I didn't open the door. After about 20 seconds, the tall one spoke through the door. His voice was low, and he didn't raise it. He said, "Are you prepared to surrender the storm data? Not your data or your footage. The storm data. Like, it didn't belong to me." I didn't respond. Just stood there, heart thudding in my ears. The shorter one shifted his weight slightly, like he was about to speak, but didn't. Then they both turned and walked away. I watched them through the peephole until they were out of view, then flipped off the lights and sat on the bed for a while, trying to process it. I looked outside 10 minutes later. No sign of them. Parking lot was empty except for a pickup 2 doors down. No black car, no footprints on the walkway. Next morning, I checked my laptop. The file I'd exported was gone. Not deleted, just not there anymore. The folder I'd saved it in was empty, and when I searched for the file name, nothing came up. The drive hadn't been wiped, just that one clip missing. The external hard drive wouldn't mount. It spun up, then made a soft click and went silent. Dead. I had backups at home, on a desktop, but I didn't feel right until I got out of town. I skipped the next chase day and drove straight back to Lincoln. Weeks later, I tried again to pull the file from the memory card, and it was there. Just glitched, all green frames and scrambled audio. Whatever had been clear before was now unreadable. I've still got the rest of the tornado footage. Regular people see a tornado tear through a field, tear apart a fence, throw a grain bin. But I remember that half-second flash, that shape inside something it had no business being inside. And I remember those two men at my door asking for it like I'd stolen it from them. I was hiking alone near the southern edge of the Bitterroot Range, early October, before the snow came in heavy. The place I went isn't on a marked trail. It's one of those old Forest Service access roads that got decommissioned years ago, now mostly used by hunters and the occasional backwoods camper. I'd found it the year before while helping a friend scout elk routes. There was a path just faint enough to follow if you knew what you were looking for. My name's Nate Shepard. I'm 38, live in Missoula, and I like to get out in the woods a few times a year to clear my head. That weekend was supposed to be a short overnight solo. Hike in, set up camp, maybe catch some stars if the sky held clear. No cell service, no sounds except wind and birds. That kind of quiet always settles me down. The weather was cold but dry. Sky overcast but thin enough that I could see the ridgelines against the clouds. I got started around 2 p.m., parked the old pullout by mile marker 87, and started up the slope. About a mile and a half in, I passed a sign I hadn't seen before. Metal, dull gray, bolted crooked into a pine. It just said, "Restricted zone, no entry beyond this point," in block letters. No agency logo, no contact number. That was odd. I'd been this way before and never seen a posted boundary. It didn't look new either. Rust had started eating into the edges, and the bottom right corner was bent like someone had tried to tear it off. I stood there for a second, thinking. I wasn't doing anything illegal. No fire, no hunting, just hiking. And from what I could tell, the sign was barely attached to anything. No fence, no tape, nothing. Just a single tree off a game trail. I figured it was left over from a fire closure or some old logging claim. I kept going. A couple more miles in, I set up camp near a small bluff that overlooked a dry creek bed. By then, the sun had dropped behind the mountains and the temperature started falling fast. I got a small fire going, made some tea, and sat on a log with my headlamp off, watching the trees sway in the breeze. Then I noticed a light. It was about tree height, maybe 30 or 40 feet up, deeper into the forest, maybe 100 yards out. At first I thought it was a drone. It had that kind of precise, hovering quality, but it moved strange. It wasn't steady. It would pulse, dim to nothing, then flare up again a few feet away, like it was blinking out and reappearing, not moving between points. The color was red, but not like a laser pointer or taillight. It was softer, more organic. A reddish glow that shifted slightly like it was being seen through water. It made no sound. No whir, no clicking, nothing. I stood up slowly, not wanting to draw attention to myself, and turned off the fire with a few scoops of dirt. The light pulsed twice more, then vanished. I stayed still, staring into the dark, but it didn't come back. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, I packed up early and started back down the trail. No light, no sound, nothing out of place, but the woods felt hollow. That's the best way I can put it. Like the wind had stopped carrying, like the forest wasn't listening anymore. I know that sounds dumb, but that's how it felt. About half a mile from where I'd parked, just before the path starts widening out near the edge of the tree line, two men were standing across the trail. Both were wearing suits, not outdoors gear, not uniforms, actual black suits. No coats, no hats, no bags. Their shoes were clean, too clean for this trail. The shorter one had gray hair and a sunken face. The other was taller, looked younger, but had the same unreadable expression. They weren't talking to each other, just standing side by side like they'd been waiting there. I slowed down and gave a quick nod, thinking maybe they were from Fish and Game or some weird private land agency. But they didn't introduce themselves or ask what I was doing. The shorter one just looked at me and said, very calmly, "This part of the forest doesn't exist." I laughed a little, instinctively, thinking I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" He repeated it. Same tone. "This part of the forest doesn't exist." I stood there a few feet away from them, unsure if I was being threatened or tested. "Look," I said, "I didn't see any fence. I was just hiking. I'm heading back to my car now." Neither of them moved. The taller one finally spoke, just 3 words. "You weren't here." I didn't say anything after that. I walked around them without making eye contact and picked up my pace. They didn't follow. When I got to the road, my truck was exactly where I'd left it, but the back tailgate was unlatched. I never leave it unlatched. Nothing was missing, just shifted around. My cooler was upside down, and my sleeping bag was unrolled and hanging halfway out the back. I threw everything in, locked the doors, and drove the hour and a half back to Missoula without stopping. Later that night, I checked the GPS app I'd used to record my hike. The track stopped abruptly about halfway in. No elevation data, no timestamps past that point. Just a straight line ending in the middle of the woods. I opened the file again the next morning. The track was gone completely. I haven't gone back. Not to that trail. Not even close. I was flying solo out of Gallup, New Mexico, late afternoon, early June. It was supposed to be a short hop, maybe 90 minutes, to Chinle, Arizona, just to drop off some documents for my boss. I work part-time ferrying cargo and small items between regional offices for a land survey company. We've got a 1981 Piper Archer we keep in a hangar at Gallup Municipal. Old bird, but it flies fine. The weather was decent, hot, a little hazy, light winds, not much traffic out there. The Four Corners region is mostly open airspace. You can go for miles without seeing another aircraft. I had no passengers, no cargo except for the sealed envelope in the back. Just me, a thermos of coffee, and a radio that kept cutting in and out with static every few minutes. The weird stuff started maybe 40 minutes in, right after I passed over Shiprock. I saw something on my right side, out the starboard window, maybe 200 feet higher and just a quarter mile off. At first I thought it was a bird or a glint from the sun. Then I got a good look. It wasn't a plane. Not anything I'd ever seen, anyway. It was a triangle, matte black, no visible engines, no markings, just a flat, solid triangle, gliding silently through the air. It didn't bank, didn't wobble, just kept pace with me, like it was tethered there. I tapped my transponder, checked my squawk. Everything was normal. I called out on CTAF. Nothing came back. Tried again. Dead air. The thing held position for maybe 30 seconds. I couldn't see any cockpit or windows. Then it drifted, really slowly, closer. Not enough to be dangerous, but close enough that I started sweating through my shirt. I turned 10 degrees south, slow and steady, trying not to spook whatever it was. It mirrored the movement exactly. There was no noise, no jet wash. Just this perfect, dead silent glide. Then, out of nowhere, it climbed, fast, straight up. Gone in 2 seconds. No contrail, no pressure shift, nothing. I scanned everywhere, but didn't see it again. The radio crackled back to life 20 seconds later. Some standard weather update from Albuquerque Center. I responded, filed my position, and continued the route like nothing had happened. When I landed at Chinley's dirt strip, I was still shaken. I got out, stretched, tried to forget it. The air was dry and hot and smelled like creosote. I handed the envelope off to the guy waiting at the little shed they call an office and went to taxi back to where I'd parked. That's when I saw the man. He was standing by the hangar. Tall, lean, black suit, white shirt, no tie. Clipboard in hand, no vehicle around. I figured he must have been waiting for someone else, but when I shut down the engine and opened the canopy, he walked straight toward me like he knew me. "Mr. LeClaire?" he asked. "That's my name." But I hadn't given it to anyone out here. He didn't offer a handshake. Just looked at me through these weird, narrow sunglasses and said, "Your route was misfiled. This airspace doesn't exist." I kind of laughed,